Many years ago, scientists believed that religion would soon disappear and people would live in a benign, rational world. But religion has not disappeared. Moreover, the majority of the world's population remains religious to this day. Kurds are an Indo-European ethnic group, the fourth largest nation in the Middle East, and the largest nation in the region without a state of its own. The vast majority of Kurds are Muslims. Religion sets a person certain rules of behavior, makes them sacred, so people are afraid to break them. But today, we will learn the story of one family, where the rules of religion were distorted in favor of their own immoral beliefs. On January 26, 2006, a young man, Rahmat Suleimani, went to the police station and reported his beloved girlfriend Banaz missing. The man became concerned about her welfare after he had been unable to contact her for a week. The police did not take the missing report seriously as the man had no family ties with the missing woman, but they were forced to check the information and go to the address of residence. When the police visited the missing woman's home, they found nothing to confirm Rahmat's words about the disappearance. Her parents behaved calmly and did not express any obvious concern as if their daughter was really missing. Moreover, the family claimed that Banaz had not been home much lately and insisted that she was not missing, but had probably left and was probably at a friend's house. The police were satisfied with this explanation, but Rahmat persisted, harassing the police with daily visits to the station and forcing them to take search measures. He would not give up. The man was desperately searching for his beloved Banaz. Banaz Mahmod was born on December 16, 1985, in Iraq. They were a traditional Iraqi Kurdish family with strict religious beliefs. They lived in the rural tribal area of Kaladiza in Iraqi Kurdistan. Mahmoud Babakir Mahmud and his wife Beya had a son Bahman and 5 daughters, Beza, Behal, Hayman, Jaband, and Banaz. It was a typical Iraqi family with strong views on the role of women. In 1995, when Banaz was 10 years old, her family fled to the UK. The move had no impact on the family's views. Remaining deeply religious and traditionally influenced, the Mahmouds Sr. were not about to change their way of life even in a liberated European country. They shunned modern notions and views and lived in their religious community. Following the traditions of the community, at the age of 17, Banaz was forcibly married to a man who was 10 years older. He had flown in from Iraq shortly before the wedding, spoke no English at all, and lacked even basic literacy. She had met her future husband only 3 times before the wedding, once on her father's property. A girl with brown eyes, long dark hair, and a kind smile, she submitted to tradition and moved into the home of a strange, alien, and cruel man. From the first days Banaz crossed the threshold of her new home, her husband set about raising her. Moral abuse, beatings, and physical violence became a daily occurrence in the girl's life. Banaz, who had lived half her life in the UK and had seen how modern people live, did not want to put up with cruelty and tyranny in her family. She made attempts to leave her husband many times, returning to her father's house, but her family forced her to return. Despite the disgusting attitude, divorce was out of the question, as it was considered a disgrace for the entire Mahmod family. Unable to find support from her relatives, Banaz went to the police twice, but even there, she was virtually abandoned to the mercy of fate, without even bothering to question her husband about his wife's injuries. In July 2005, after 2 agonizing years of marriage, Banaz ran away from her tyrant husband's house and returned to her parents' home. This was the first link in the chain of events that led to Banaz Mahmod's disappearance. After her separation from her husband, Banaz felt as if she was breathing again. She met a man named Rahmat Suleimani. The bright, pretty 19-year-old girl fell in love with the man. Rahmat was charmed by Banaz's beauty and modesty. They liked each other very much, but had to keep the beginning of their relationship a secret. Having exchanged telephone numbers, the lovers allowed themselves to correspond only twice a day, early in the morning and late in the evening. Rahmat was different from the men in Banaz's entourage. Calm, judicious, and polite, Rahmat treated the girl very reverently and tenderly and won her heart at once. Within a short time, the couple was already dreaming of a wedding and a happy family life. They even came up with names for their future children. These fantasies filled Banaz with happiness and kept her afloat, not allowing her to break under the pressure of hatred and aggression, which was spewed at her by her family, who never accepted the departure of her husband. In early October 2005, while walking down the street, Banaz noticed the same car following her and someone following her. From their appearance, she realized that they were Kurdish diaspora people assigned by her father. The girl, who knew the foundations of her family, became very scared for her safety. On October 10, 2005, Banaz went to the police again. During a 2-hour interview, she told the detective on duty in detail about her life with her husband, the injuries she had received from him, her family's resentment, and the surveillance that had begun. She shared with local police that she had been repeatedly beaten by her tyrant husband, and during one of the assaults, she nearly had a tooth knocked out because she publicly called her husband by his first name. She brought to the attention of the police several times that she seriously feared for her safety and even her life. But unfortunately, Banaz's statement went into the back of the desk, and detectives didn't even bother to interview her family and husband and verify the accuracy of the information. Again, Banaz's statement is not taken properly. She promises to contact the police again if she feels she is in danger. For about 2 months, Banaz and Rahmat met secretly and went undetected. But in early December 2005, when they met near a London subway station, they were spotted by people from the clan. Information about another disgrace was immediately reported to the girl's father. That same evening, a council consisting of all male relatives gathered at the Mahmod family home. During a heated discussion of Banaz's actions, which they considered inappropriate, her uncle Ari Mahmod announced that to restore the family's honor, Banaz should be killed. She overheard this conversation. In December 2005, Banaz went to the police again and detailed that she had been under surveillance for months and that the day before she had learned that they wanted to take her life. She made a list of 5 members of her own family who were to carry out the massacre, but the law enforcers again did not take her words seriously. Soon it turns out that it was a big mistake, the consequence of which will be the disappearance of Banaz. And to learn about her fate, detectives will have to wade through a web of lies, cruelty, and ignorance. 2 weeks later, Banaz's father tricks her into going to a relative's house, promising to discuss her divorce. When she arrived, Bubakir Mahmod made her drink brandy and left her alone in a room with the TV on. Casually turning around, she sees her father putting on rubber gloves and reaching for a rope. Realizing that she was about to be taken out of her life, Banaz rushed to the front door, but the door was locked. In order to get out, she had to break a window, the shards of which cut her hands. The girl managed to get to a nearby cafe where she fainted. The paramedics who arrived at the scene took her to the hospital where they called the police. When Banaz regained consciousness, she called Rahmat and asked him to come. After being discharged from the hospital, Banaz went to live with Rahmat Suleimani. They welcomed the beginning of 2006 together and were quite happy, but by mid-January, the Mahmod family furiously began urging Banaz to return home to mend their relationship with her and discuss her marriage to Rahmat. Banaz believed her mom and dad and agreed to go back to her father's house. She believed that in case her father attacked her, her mother would protect her from harm. As insurance, Banaz visited the police station again, writing a full statement and the names of people who might harm her. The young woman was fearful, but still returned to her family and parents' home. On January 22, 2006, in the street, 3 men attempted to grab Rahmat and force him into a car. Suleimani was able to fight back and report the incident to the police. 2 days later, he and Banaz were to appear at the station to testify, but Banaz never showed up. All attempts by Rahmat to contact her were unsuccessful, as Banaz Mahmod disappeared after returning to her parents' house. Rahmat, who had been in constant contact with her, was very worried and filed a missing persons report with the police. Numerous appeals to the police eventually bore fruit. The case of Banaz Mahmod's disappearance came to the attention of the Homicide and Serious Crime Directorate, and Chief Inspector Caroline Good was appointed to lead the investigation. The first version of the disappearance was that Banaz was being held in a house in the diaspora. To search for the woman, Inspector Caroline Good organized a large-scale search of properties associated with the Mahmod family. The suspects, Banaz's father and uncle, as well as her ex-husband, were called in for questioning. Searches have begun for 3 other men on the list Banaz provided to police in December 2005: Omar Hussein, Muhammad Ali, and Muhammad Ham. All of them were Banaz's cousins. When police searched the forest and tried to question her family, doors were slammed in their faces and the family was unable to help investigate her disappearance. Police found no pictures of her at the family home, and according to Caroline Good, officers were outraged by the complete indifference from her family. Then 30 people came to the attention of Caroline Good. All of them were arrested and interrogated. During searches from the persons involved in the case, were seized more than 20 vehicles and 300 cell phones. Absolutely all those questioned tried in one way or another to slow down the investigation, giving completely contradictory testimony about Banaz's whereabouts. Some lied about seeing her after her disappearance. Others, including Banaz's mother, simply refused to talk to the police, and some claimed she was a fugitive. Realizing that none of them would cooperate voluntarily, Caroline Good obtained permission to install listening devices in the cell of those arrested. At the time, Banaz's father and uncle, as well as Muhammad Hama, remained behind bars. The other 2 men on the list managed to flee to Iraq. When the detectives received the first results of the wiretap, they were horrified. Not only did all 3 arrested men have no regrets, they literally savored the details of Banaz's death. From their conversations, it became clear that in the early morning hours of January 23rd, the Mahmod family deliberately left their home, letting Ali, Hussein, and Hama inside. There they attacked Banaz and subjected her to beatings and violence for 2 hours. At the end of the torture, Hama tightened a cord around her neck and strangled her. As he recounted the last moments of Banaz's life, Hama could not contain his laughter. But it was the accusation of her cousin, Mohammed Hama, after he admitted to being there when Ramat was threatened, that became the turning point. While Hama was held in cells awaiting trial, his phone conversations were secretly recorded. Caroline Good, with a new dose of horror, listened to the recordings, in which the suspect proudly described the details of the massacre of a relative. They congratulated each other on how courageous they were. Hama shared in detail what they had done to Banaz. She was vomiting and scared but didn't utter a sound. He then wrapped the rope around her neck 3 times so tightly that it burrowed under the young woman's skin. He excitedly continued to speak as he placed his feet on her back and pulled and tugged on the rope. Banaz clung to life until her last breath. It took the criminals more than half an hour for her to die. Caroline Good and the detectives who had seen much could not hold back tears as they realized the horror that innocent Banaz had endured. At the time of Banaz's abuse, her cousin, 30-year-old Dana Amin, was in the house and helped the perpetrators push Banaz's body into a suitcase. Ari Mahmoud dragged him out of the house to a waiting auto nearby. Hama added that a police car drove by, but its crew did not pay attention to the suitcase, which had hair and an elbow sticking out of it. The very people who were supposed to protect her from harm plotted her murder, strangled her with a shoelace, stuffed her body into a suitcase. The perpetrators then took the gruesome luggage outside London, with scraps of conversation mentioning a derelict house with a garden in Birmingham. Caroline Good matched the information she received with the movement data of the arrestees' phones and determined the search area. Given the vastness of the area, the work could take a long time, but to help the investigation again came to the aid of the criminals themselves, who turned out to be quite talkative and literally reveled in the act of retribution. During the conversation, one of them suddenly asked the accomplices if they had put the freezer back in its place. Now Good knew exactly what she had to look for. A police helicopter was dispatched to search, and while repeatedly circling the area, it spotted a house whose backyard was littered with a pile of trash. Among the black garbage bags, a white oblong object that looked very much like a freezer stood out as a bright spot. A close inspection of the suspicious house on the ground confirmed the hunch. Setting aside the heavy equipment, the police officers began digging. In shifts, they dug, but when the depth of the hole reached their shoulders, the policemen were ready to give up. All except Caroline Good. She clearly remembered the words of Mohammed Hamma, who had cheerfully expressed in front of relatives that he had buried her so deep that they would only be able to find her with the help of an informer. The inspector convinced everyone to extend the search for one more day, and late in the evening of April 28, 2006, the suitcase was found. Banaz's remains were in extremely poor condition, so only dental records and DNA samples could be used to identify her. Her body, folded into a fetal position and hidden in a suitcase, was buried under a freezer in the garden of a house in Birmingham. On May 1, 2006, the suspects were charged. They were all convinced that they had done exactly the right thing and showed no remorse. Mohammed Hamma smugly declared that the case would never go to trial because he was carrying out an act of retaliation. Caroline Good did have to face a new wave of opposition organized by the Kurdish diaspora. After the discovery of Banaz's remains, the police received a flood of those wishing to provide the criminals with alibis, all of whom claimed that on the day of the alleged death of the woman, the suspects were in public and could not have committed such a crime. In total, the case involved 50 people involved in one way or another in Banaz's death. Caroline Good later recalled those events this way: "I felt nothing but anger, disgust, and contempt for these men. 50 men had actually participated in the murder of one woman, and they were proud of their masculinity." In early March 2007, London's Central Criminal Court began hearing cases against Boubakir Mahmoud, Ari Mahmoud, and Mohammed Ham. Prosecutor Victor Temple, during the trial, described the crime as a cold-blooded and heartless execution that was ordered by the victim's father and uncle. In June 2007, a jury unanimously found all three guilty of the charges and not deserving of leniency. The father was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years, the uncle received life imprisonment with a minimum term of 23 years, and cousin Mohammed Hamma also received life imprisonment, but with a minimum term of 17 years. Delivering the verdict, Judge Brian Barker said, "In order to restore your so-called family honor, you have decided that she must die and her memory must be erased. This is a barbaric and heartless crime. What honor is there in a father putting his status in society above the life of his own flesh and blood?" But what could these words mean to the ruthless criminals who had long carefully planned to rid themselves of the fictitious disgrace? 4 months after the trio's conviction, the London police were notified that Muhammad Ali had been arrested for a crime against a boy in Iraq. He had taken his life. The leadership of Scotland Yard had to make a lot of efforts for his extradition because previously Iraq never agreed to such measures and did not extradite its citizens. But the British managed to get their way, and in June 2009, Ali was extradited to the United Kingdom. Omar Hussein, the last of the 5 perpetrators, was hiding in the Iraqi countryside, trying not to be seen by the public. In December 2009, during an argument with one of his brothers, he was shot in the leg and had to seek medical attention. He was arrested at the hospital by the police who were called, and after his discharge, they began preparing him for extradition. Initially, Hussein claimed that he had not been in London in 2005, and therefore he could not be involved in Banaz's death. However, this was contradicted by UK Social Security records, according to which he was receiving refugee benefits at the time without delay. In March 2010, Hussein was extradited. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 21 years. Dana Amin, who was in the house at the time of Banaz's murder, was sentenced to 8 years in prison for helping to dispose of the victim's body and obstructing justice. Banaz's recorded interview at the police station at one of her addresses proved her family's guilt. She once handed over a letter to a South London police station in which she gave the names of men she said were ready to kill her and her boyfriend Rahmat, with whom she had been seen kissing. The people she refers to and names were members of her family and the wider Iraqi Kurdish community, enraged by Banaz's decision to divorce a man who acted as if she was a dirty shoe to be worn whenever they wanted. She tried to leave him several times, but returned to try again, at the insistence of her family. The indifference of the police in this case, which cost the life of a young woman, has led to a significant change in the way such honor cases are handled today. Following the death of Banaz Mahmod, an inquiry into police misconduct was launched. An independent commission prosecuted 9 police officers for their inadequate response to allegations made by Banaz. 7 of them received reprimands and 2 were dismissed. Worth highlighting in this case is the tenacious team of Caroline Good, who was able not only to find Banaz's body, but also to secure the conviction of her father and uncle, and to bring back the escaped criminals from Iraq. Unfortunately, this would not bring the marvelous Banaz back to life, nor would it change the fact that the people on Earth who were the worst for her were her relatives, who by basic instinct should be her most important protectors. Banaz was buried in the Merton and Sutton Joint Cemetery in Morden. A memorial service for Banaz was held on June 26, 2007 at the Morden Auditorium, followed by a granite memorial headstone at her grave. Her family did not attend either service. Few people, including Rahmat Suleimani, Caroline Good, and Banaz's 2 sisters, came to honor the memory of the unfortunate woman. The memorial was paid for by law enforcement officials working on the Banaz case and the women's rights organization. Rahmat Suleimani, who remained in the UK under the Witness Protection Program, never recovered from the death of Banaz. He wrote a letter of condolence to his deceased beloved, telling her that she was the love of his life. No, she was just the whole world to him. In May 2016, 10 years after the crime, he hanged himself. This marked his 3rd attempt to end his life. There is little evidence of the extent of the problem with the police, as the law is not required to record honor crimes. The Association for the Protection of Women's Rights in Iran and Kurdistan reported that police recorded more than 2,800 cases of honor-based violence in 2010. However, an organization set up to support victims of honor crimes and forced marriages said that more than half of the 600 calls they received each month, though unattended due to insufficient evidence. The UN estimates there were 5,000 honor killings worldwide in 2000. The worst form of censure against women who are perceived to have dishonored a family or community. While most cases are in South Asia or the Middle East, and in predominantly Muslim communities, cases such as that of 19-year-old Banaz Mahmod have highlighted tensions in immigrant communities trying to adjust to changing lifestyles. Some groups suggest that thousands of honor crimes go unnoticed in minority communities in Britain. Hundreds more women are taken abroad where they are forced into marriage or seriously harmed when their changed outlook on life puts them in conflict with their traditional male communities. Banaz Mahmod Bakabir Aga, a young woman of Kurdish descent, died on January 23, 2006 for the honor of her family. Her older sister, Bahal, urged other women in the same situation as her and her sister not to be afraid to seek help before it was too late. Even today, she continues to fear for her life, lives at a secret address, and never goes outside without a long black veil that covers her entire body and face except for her eyes. After all, even running away or living a secret life takes place in constant fear of being found, and from Banaz's story, it is obvious that there simply could not be a happy ending. Oriental women probably absorb submission and dependence on men with their mother's milk, accepting their will over and over again, whatever it may be. The Metropolitan Police team responsible for the investigation and for finding Banaz's body and filing a case against those involved in her murder has won an award for their work in detective investigation. Chief Inspector Carolyn Good was awarded the Royal Police Medal for her work in leading the investigation. The videotape, which had long gone unnoticed by the public for 7 years, has become crucial evidence for investigators after warnings about the dangers faced by the young woman went largely unheeded. A camera set up in the corner of a police interrogation room captured the young woman's nervousness as she brushes her hair away from her face and begins to tell her grim story. Banaz Mahmod quietly and in detail describes the violence and oppression at the hands of her abusive husband. She tells of intimidation by men on the street whom she recognizes. Then, finally, she warns of her impending death because of the dishonor she has brought upon her family. "Until now, they follow me," Miss Mahmoud says in ragged English with a strong Iraqi accent, for she has lived in the Kurdish region of northern Iraq. "This is the main reason I came to the police station. In the future, at any time, if something happens to me, it will be them." Then the camera turns off, the lights go out, and total darkness sets in. The case of Rosa Peral. Vinuela, a body in flames. A love triangle typically leads to no good, with all involved parties inevitably suffering as each one becomes dependent. The very emergence of a new participant in a relationship signals trouble in the couple's interaction. Yet some believe that monogamy is a thing of the past, advocating for relationships where one is not limited in the number of loved ones. Such was the belief of our protagonist today, who shattered the lives and destinies of the men unfortunate enough to be close to her. The case of Rosa Peral Vinuela caused quite a stir in Spain a few years ago. This woman easily entered into relationships, manipulated men by playing with their feelings, and then got rid of her tiresome lovers using harsh, sometimes radical methods. Intriguingly, she worked in law enforcement and often engaged in workplace romances. Rosa was blessed with attractive looks, which she used to her advantage. She had been in an official marriage, was the center of an intimate scandal, and was simultaneously engaged to 2 different men. However, these adventures were not enough for her. She dared to commit a crime against a weary fiancé, attempting to pin the blame on her ex-husband and a lover. The most horrifying aspect was that her own child witnessed this appalling act. Rosa Peral, the early years. Rosa Peral. Vinuela was born on October 15, 1985, in a suburb of Barcelona, becoming the second child in her family. She grew up in a modest household that had migrated from Andalusia in search of a better life. Her mother, Maria, was a homemaker dedicated to creating a cozy home environment and raising the children, while her father, Francisco, worked as a security guard. Rosa was raised alongside her older brother, Paul, with whom she was very close. Those personally acquainted with her described Rosa as sweet, kind-hearted, and friendly. Neighbors spoke highly of the Peral family, considering them a united, strong, and happy household. In school, Rosa was a good student. She wasn't necessarily at the top of her class, but was diligent and persistent, always striving for high grades. She was also active in sports and dreamed of a career in law enforcement. After graduating from high school, she enrolled at Pompeu Fabra University in Barcelona, while simultaneously preparing for the exams and tests required to enter the police academy in Avila. Rosa was strikingly attractive and possessed a powerful charisma, which attracted many admirers from a young age. She skillfully leveraged her allure. During her college years, she worked as a waitress in one of the popular nightclubs, earning a decent salary and tips that allowed her to pay for her education independently. At that time, Rosa was dating a young man named Ruben Carbo, who served in the Barcelona City Guard. He helped his girlfriend prepare for the competitive examinations at the academy. A talent detection test, a multiple-choice exam, and an oral interview. Although Rosa didn't pass the physical test on her first try, her perseverance paid off, and she was eventually admitted to the academy, where she underwent professional training. Peral specialized in general law enforcement activities. She quickly advanced in her career, was highly valued at her service, and her salary allowed her to live comfortably without wanting for anything. A valued employee, a stellar wife and mother. Soon after graduating from the police academy, the young woman married her beloved Ruben. The couple had a modest wedding attended only by their closest relatives and friends. The newlyweds moved to Barcelona, where they soon welcomed 2 daughters, one after the other. At work, Rosa was regarded as a responsible, disciplined, and promising employee. Her attractive and approachable appearance often led to her participation in social media videos broadcasted on local television. In these videos, she encouraged residents and visitors of the city to behave lawfully and with integrity. She even gained some popularity, with people sometimes recognizing her on the street. Rosa was successful in her career, respected and valued as an employee, and at the same time, she was a loving wife and a caring mother to her 2 children. She had an impeccable reputation, inspiring genuine admiration and even envy among those around her. However, no one could have imagined the double life she was leading until one incident. An intimate scandal and the collapse of a reputation. In early 2011, Rosa's colleagues began receiving emails containing photographs and videos of a personal nature. The images showed the married Peral engaging in intimate moments with her former partner, Junior Inspector Oscar Leffs, at their place of work. Outraged by her lover's actions, Rosa immediately filed a complaint with the police, demanding compensation for emotional distress and strict legal action against the perpetrator. However, it proved impossible to establish that Oscar was indeed the one who sent out the photos and videos, though Rosa had no doubts about it, and he avoided any repercussions. Nonetheless, both employees were demoted and transferred to different departments for their inappropriate behavior. Moreover, the distribution of compromising materials did not cease, with not only colleagues but also friends and relatives of Rosa receiving them. A serious scandal erupted, and Rosa's previously impeccable reputation was shattered. The situation had a negative impact on her work, family life, and relationships with colleagues and friends. The young woman was acutely aware that she was being judged by everyone around her, and her actions became one of the most discussed topics. Furthermore, some expressed their disapproval of her immoral actions directly to her face. Rosa's character began to deteriorate rapidly. From a friendly, sociable person, she turned into someone perceived as harsh and even spiteful. However, many rightly considered this transformation a defensive reaction to the bullying and condemnation she faced. Surprisingly, despite such a scandalous and resonant ordeal, Rosa managed to maintain her marriage with Ruben. Yet, the trust between them was irreparably damaged. They stayed together for almost another year and a half until a new romantic interest entered Rosa's life. Another workplace romance and professional misconduct around mid-2012, it became known about Rosa's new romance with another colleague, Albert Lopez Ferrero. The couple spent a significant amount of time trying to keep their relationship under wraps, but between 2011 and 2012, they became involved in several incidents related to the abuse of their official powers. During the investigations into these incidents, the partners and lovers protected each other, which allowed them both to evade any disciplinary actions. It's worth noting that Albert was reserved, shared little about himself, and didn't make close friends among his colleagues. He was seriously into boxing and had a quick temper, which sometimes made him very aggressive, often to the detriment of those who happened to be near him at the wrong time. For instance, in 2011, while he and Rosa were patrolling the streets of Barcelona, Ferrero got into an argument with an immigrant from Senegal who was selling goods on the street without the necessary permit. Instead of taking the vendor to the station, after a brief verbal altercation, Ferrero physically assaulted him, causing severe injuries. However, during the subsequent investigation, Peral defended her lover, claiming that the victim had attacked him first and that he was merely defending himself. Another similar incident occurred, and in 2012, a suspect that Rosa and Albert were supposed to bring to the station mysteriously lost his life during the arrest. The investigation led nowhere, and the partners insisted that the fault lay solely with the deceased himself. Eventually, their version of events was accepted, and the case was dismissed due to a lack of evidence of any wrongdoing. As for the relationship between the two, it could be described as sporadic. The lovers grew closer through their work together, but their passion ebbed and flowed. Albert showed little interest in Rosa beyond physical intimacy. Their affair didn't progress but continued for several years without ending. It seems that both were content with this arrangement. Divorce and a new love triangle. When Rosa and Albert's relationship was no longer a secret, Reuben finally decided to divorce his unfaithful wife, realizing she would never change and would continue to seek other romantic encounters whenever the opportunity arose. The couple managed to avoid public scandals and bitter confrontations, but their parting could hardly be called amicable. Reuben soon entered into a serious relationship with a woman named Antonia, who quickly found common ground not only with his daughters, but also with his ex-wife. Rosa often called Reuben's new partner, sharing her personal disappointments and professional troubles. Antonia listened calmly, offered comfort and even advice. For Antonia, this communication was a sort of assurance that Reuben had no lingering ties to his ex-wife and that their relationship was truly over. Regarding custody, the daughters stayed with their mother, but Reuben was allowed to see them any time and take them home for weekends and holidays. After the divorce, Rosa chose not to continue her relationship with Albert, feeling it was leading nowhere. However, she soon started a new romance with Pedro Rodriguez, who had long shown a keen interest in her and had been actively courting her. Little was known about Pedro. He was born in Barcelona in 1979, where he spent his childhood and most of his adult life. He also worked in law enforcement, albeit in the transportation department, so their professional paths rarely crossed. At the time he met Rosa, Pedro was married and raising a 5-year-old son with his wife. Yet, Rosa's allure was irresistible to him. Consumed with thoughts of her day and night, he didn't hesitate to leave his family as soon as she reciprocated his feelings. Adding complexity to the situation was the fact that Pedro was a longtime friend of Albert's. When news of his romance with Rosa became public, the ex-lover was baffled. Driven by a painful jealousy, he began to harass Rosa, demanding explanations for her actions. To defuse the situation, Peral told Ferrero that the connection between her and Rodriguez could never match the chemistry they had shared over the years. This way, she implied to her former lover that she still harbored certain feelings and physical attraction towards him. The resumption of their intimate relationship seemed inevitable, as a definitive end to their saga had yet to be declared. A double engagement Rosa and Pedro seemed to be living more than a blissful life together. Along with Rosa's children, they settled into a spacious home in a nice neighborhood of Barcelona, traveled often, appeared everywhere as a close-knit family, and seemed genuinely happy. Feeling ready for the next step in their relationship, Pedro proposed to Rosa with a beautiful ring, and she joyfully accepted. The couple started planning their wedding. Around the same time, Rosa began secretly meeting with Albert. Typically, they spent time together in hotel rooms on the outskirts of the city to avoid being seen. Rosa even complained to her lover that Pedro didn't quite measure up to him in intimacy. She also mentioned Pedro's difficult personality and expressed doubts about her future happiness with him. In January 2017, Albert, previously indifferent to serious commitments, unexpectedly proposed to Rosa, presenting her with an expensive ring. Remarkably, she accepted his proposal too, wearing the ring secretly from Pedro. The fact of her double engagement greatly flattered Rosa, and she even bragged about it to her closest friends. Soon, Pedro noticed changes in Rosa's behavior, and her frequent absences led him to suspect. Moreover, Rosa found it increasingly difficult to justify her meetups with Albert. This strained Rosa and Pedro's relationship significantly. They argued often, and Rosa's increasingly aggressive and unpredictable behavior alarmed Pedro, making him fear for his safety. Eventually, Albert disclosed his affair with Rosa to his former friend, sparking yet another scandal. Rosa admitted to the betrayal but assured Pedro it was a one-time incident, driven by threats and pressure from Albert. Pedro pretended to believe her, not wanting to end their engagement, still hoping for a future of happiness together. However, from that point on, he began to monitor her every move, or at least that's what she told everyone. Pedro's fate-sealed Rosa claimed that her fiancé's jealousy was unbearable. He scrutinized her phone calls, monitored her social media interactions, and restricted her from spending time with friends. This behavior infuriated her, and any affection she once had for Pedro had vanished. Instead of confronting him or ending the engagement, Rosa devised a drastic plan to eliminate her troublesome fiancé. She decided to end his life, with Albert playing a pivotal role in this scheme, ready to be the fall guy if anything went awry. In mid-April 2017, Rosa confided her plans to her lover. She outlined that Pedro needed to be removed in such a manner that Ruben would appear to be the primary suspect. This was Rosa's way of retaliating against her ex-husband, who was still fighting for custody of their children. Notably, at this time, her fiancé was undergoing rehabilitation from a complex spinal surgery, during which a titanium plate had been inserted. The conspirators meticulously prepared for their heinous act. Rosa purchased a disposable phone, which she planned to dispose of immediately after the deed was done. They also pre-discussed the details and alternative plans in case any part of their original scheme proved unfeasible. Lovers and accomplices. On the night of April 30th, Rosa prepared a farewell romantic dinner for her fiancé. They spent the evening together, with Pedro blissfully unaware that he had less than a day to live. The following day, Sunday, they went shopping together, visited Rosa's parents, and then headed to her ex-husband's house to pick up the girls who had been staying with him for the weekend. At home, Rosa fed the children and then sent them to their room on the second floor, asking them to stay upstairs. The exact moment Albert entered the house remains unclear, as the accounts from those involved have repeatedly changed and contradicted one another. It is known that Rosa drugged Pedro with an unidentified substance mixed into a water-diluted medication he was taking post-surgery to alleviate pain. Shortly after consuming this mixture, Pedro's reaction became significantly delayed. He struggled with spatial orientation, moved slowly, and had poor cognitive function, making him an easy target. The exact method by which the lovers ended Pedro's life remains unclear, but one of Rosa's daughters, who ventured downstairs amidst the noise, claimed she saw her mother push him down the stairs. However, the court did not take the 6-year-old girl's words into account. Regardless, after the act, the couple placed Rodriguez's body in the trunk of a previously rented car to dispose of it later. There was also speculation that the man was still alive at that moment. The accomplices then drove the car to a deserted marshland outside the city, placed the body in the driver's seat, doused everything in a flammable liquid, and set it ablaze. Rosa thoughtfully left Pedro's phone at the scene, and upon returning home, she called it several times and sent messages begging for forgiveness and asking him to come back. Remains in a burned car. The morning after the incident, Rosa called her father, Francisco, sobbing into the phone, claiming that she and Pedro had a major argument. She told him that Pedro had ended their engagement, stated he no longer wanted to see her, and drove off in his car without specifying his destination. Rosa also reached out to several of Pedro's close friends and relatives, inquiring if they had seen him. She tearfully narrated their dispute and separation to everyone. For 3 days there was no word from Rodriguez, but on the afternoon of May 4th, a young cyclist riding outside the city stumbled upon a burned vehicle containing human bones. He immediately reported his find to the police, and soon an investigative team was at the scene. The car contained severely charred human remains that were unidentifiable. However, a titanium plate recently implanted in the man's spine helped in identifying him. This implant had a unique serial number, which was used to confirm the remains were Pedro's. Based on the car's location and the nature of the fire, investigators concluded that the vehicle had been intentionally set ablaze, and the driver had either been prevented from escaping or was already deceased at the time of the fire. Given these circumstances, The case was classified as a deliberate act of ending a life. An investigation was launched, the details of which were kept confidential until the trial. Investigation and suspects. Once the remains were identified, police officers were dispatched to Rosa's residence to deliver the tragic news of her fiancé's fate. She attempted to feign shock and grief, but her expression quickly reverted to an indifferent calm as she responded to routine inquiries. Her demeanor was oddly composed for someone who had just been informed of her fiancé's demise. Rosa refused to go to the police station, claiming she had no one to watch her children, and also denied the officers entry to her home to avoid alarming her daughters. However, she immediately suggested to the officers that her ex-husband, Ruben, could be involved in her fiancé's demise, driven by jealousy. This accusation promptly placed Ruben among the primary suspects, but he soon provided a solid alibi, having spent several days in another city with Antonia, visiting her parents after picking up the girls with Rosa. Rosa herself became a suspect next. Her remarkable calm and detachment raised eyebrows. Yet, aiming to stay ahead, she voluntarily went to the station and suggested her former lover, Albert, as the perpetrator. According to Rosa, he had been harassing her, demanding she break off the engagement with Pedro to marry him instead, and had become enraged and threatening after her refusal. When police arrested Albert as a suspect, he immediately began testifying against Rosa, implicating her as the mastermind and executor of the crime. He disclosed that it was Rosa who had orchestrated the entire plot, including drugging Pedro to incapacitate him, making him an easy target. Rosa was arrested the same day based on this revelation. Trial and sentences. During interrogations, the lovers provided wildly different accounts of the events on that fateful evening. They desperately tried to shift blame onto each other. Their stories were inconsistent, and they struggled to accurately reconstruct the sequence of events. The investigation lasted nearly a year, with law enforcement painstakingly attempting to piece together the crime scene. It became clear that the pair had premeditated the act, indicating it was intentional and planned rather than spontaneous. Despite this, the woman maintained her innocence. She claimed that Albert showed up at her and Pedro's doorstep that evening, armed and irrational. Upon seeing her enraged ex-lover, she fled upstairs, fearing for her daughter's safety and attempting to protect them. At this moment, she alleged, Ferrero carried out the act on her fiancé. Mobile phone data played a crucial role in the investigation. Despite Rosa's belief that they had covered their tracks, investigators discovered she had communicated with her lover using disposable phones on the day of the incident. Additionally, Albert's personal phone was tracked near the location of the burned vehicle on the night of May 1st. The trial of the accused pair didn't begin until February 2020. Despite the woman's attempts to portray herself as a victim, Ferrero's attorney argued that his client only assisted her in disposing of the body, suggesting she was the mastermind behind the entire operation. He described Rosa as a cunning manipulator, capable of using others for her own ends. Antonia, now raising her and Ruben's daughters with him, also testified, reiterating that the older daughter witnessed her mother pushing a bloodied Pedro down the stairs. However, the child's statement was not taken into consideration. Yet, Rosa accused her of lying, claiming Antonia simply wanted to see her imprisoned for as long as possible out of jealousy. In March 2020, both suspects were found guilty of premeditated ending of life and concealing evidence of the crime. Rosa was sentenced to 25 years in prison, while Albert received a 20-year sentence. Additionally, they were ordered to pay nearly 100,000 euros in moral damages to Rodriguez's family. However, as it turned out, all of Rosa's assets were registered in her parents' names, rendering her financially insolvent. Following the verdict, both convicts made numerous appeals, each maintaining their innocence. However, the Supreme Court of Catalonia rejected these appeals, leaving the sentences unchanged. The aftermath for those involved. Rosa's parents, despite the guilty verdict, never believed their daughter was capable of committing such a heinous act. Now, the children's biological father, Ruben Carbo, officially serves as their guardian. He raises the daughters from his previous marriage alongside his wife Antonia, with whom he also has a son. Notably, Reuben has always allowed the girls to maintain contact with their maternal grandparents. Interestingly, following Rosa's arrest in 2017, she was only able to see her daughters nearly 2 years later, in the spring of 2019, under the supervision of Reuben and his current wife. However, he has since refrained from bringing the girls to prison visits, believing the environment adversely affects their mental health. In 2022, it was revealed that Rosa, while incarcerated, attempted to hire someone to end the lives of her ex-husband Reuben and Antonia. Her plan was uncovered, preventing the crime. Rosa claimed that desperation to see her children drove her to this drastic measure. She believed that if Reuben were no longer alive, custody would revert to her parents, who she expected would not obstruct the girls' visits. As for Albert, while serving his sentence, he decided to pursue a law degree, enrolling in a Spanish university. He also dedicated himself to learning foreign languages. The case of Rosa Maria Peral Vinuela inspired a mini-series titled Body in Flames, which premiered on Spanish television in the fall of 2023. Additionally, her story became the subject of a documentary film, Rosa's Ribbons, portraying her as an innocent victim. The Salma Montes case. Why did a young student pay with her life? Our today's story, widely publicized as the Salma Montes case, took place in Mexico just a few years ago. The victim was a young law school student who was guilty of breaking off her engagement to her fiancé, who abused her. For this, the 22-year-old girl paid for her life in the most brutal way, and her executioner, with the support of loved ones, was confident that he would escape punishment. In a wicked irony of fate, Salma studied at the faculty, specializing in crimes against women. Who is Salma Montes? Our current heroine was born in 1996, November 18th, in a small Mexican town, Delicias, located in the state of Chihuahua, in the northern part of the country. The full name given to her at birth is Salma Yajaira Montes Soto. She was the youngest of 2 children in the family and was raised with her older sister Karen. The girl's birth father, whose name was Gabriel, passed away from a heart attack when Salma was barely 4 years old, and her sister was 8 years old. Since then, their mother Soledad raised the children on her own. The woman never married again and devoted herself to her daughters, doing everything to ensure that they did not need anything. Salma grew up a kind, sociable, and responsive girl. She had many friends from an early age. She adored animals and always came to the aid of others at the first call. Those around her characterized her as a petite, smiling brunette with incredibly beautiful eyes and a kind soul. As a child, Salma, playing with her sister, fell off the swing and split her eyebrow, which left her a small scar in the form of a crescent moon, but it did not spoil her attractive appearance, and rather even became a kind of highlight. In adolescence, the girl, like many of her peers, decided to make a few small tattoos, which, as it seemed, reflected her inner world and state of mind. Her mother, although she was a person of conservative views, did not object and prevent her younger daughter's self-expression. She did well in school, although she was not an excellent student. She dreamed of getting a higher education, but knew that her family has no money to pay for expensive university tuition, and therefore made every effort to get a scholarship and study for free. Although not without difficulty, but Salma succeeded, and she became a student at the prestigious National Autonomous University of Mexico. The girl entered the Faculty of Law, choosing a specialization, crimes against women. Roman with a butcher. In 2006, the 20-year-old student met a young man whose name was Kevin Gualberto Pilcaster. The guy was 5 years older than her. He worked as a cook in one of the local catering establishments and dreamed of a career as a restaurateur. It is noteworthy that the young man began his professional career as a butcher, cutting up cattle carcasses in a butcher's shop owned by his family. Kevin was quite nice, good-looking, and courteous. He knew how to make a good impression, and he seemed to Salma to be a good guy. Between them began a friendly communication, which very quickly turned into a romantic relationship. 5-year age difference was not a serious obstacle, and about a year later the couple officially engaged. Members of the Pilcaster family gladly accepted Salma. despite the fact that her family was much more modest in terms of material wealth. They believed that the young beauty has a positive effect on Kevin, who next to her literally glowed with happiness. But there was another reason, which they preferred not to talk about. As it turned out, the guy had attacks of aggression, from which suffered all those who were unlucky to be at that moment near. However, after the engagement, as it seemed to everyone, he became a little more restrained and calm. But Soledad and Karen did not want to be related to the rich chosen Salma. They noticed a change in Salma's behavior, which caused them genuine concern. Since the beginning of their relationship with Kevin, she became withdrawn, often crying, closed in his room, and from the smiling and cheerful leader has not left a trace. At the same time, Salma desperately tried to convince her mother and sister that she was fine. In addition, her face and body were periodically bruised, which she carefully tried to hide, and their origin was not explained in any way, avoiding an answer. When Salma accepted a marriage proposal from her boyfriend, her loved ones were shocked and desperately tried to dissuade her from marrying a guy who abuses her. But the young student, despite everything, was in love with her chosen one and naively believed that everything would change for the better. A scandalous breakup. Time passed, and Kevin became more and more irascible, aggressive, and intemperate. He was jealous of his passport literally to every pillar, forbade her to communicate with fellow students, and in general with any guys, and also demanded that Salma daily reported to him about where she was and with whom she saw. On this ground, the couple constantly quarreled, and the young man often put his fists into action. At the end of March 2019, after another major quarrel, which ended in manhandling, Salma broke off the engagement just a couple of months before the planned wedding. For her fiancé, it turned out to be a terrible blow, but not because he loved the girl, was very worried about it and wanted to fix everything, but because he took the deed of the chosen one as a personal insult. First time, Kevin tried to return the bride, but he did it in an ultimatum and orderly form. When he realized that she did not want to see him anymore, he suddenly changed tactics. He again became courteous and polite, as at the beginning of their relationship, offered the former lover to remain friends and continued to communicate. A couple of weeks after the breakup, the young people finally calmly talked and seemed to have figured everything out. Salma at the time was actively preparing for the defense of the diploma, had an internship, and was too busy studying, and therefore about the conflict with her former fiancé and broken engagement almost did not think. When on May 31st, Salma unexpectedly called Kevin and proposed to meet, she did not think it strange or suspicious, and she agreed. They agreed to see each other that evening in the parking lot outside the local Natural History Museum on the northeast side of town. The guy worked near the place and often left his car there. After school, Salma was given a ride to the building by a close friend of hers named Violet. Since it was Friday night, they said goodbye until Monday, agreeing to go to the library together that day to study. There was a Ford Transit van in the parking lot, which belonged to Kevin's parents and which he himself used as his work vehicle. The young man was supposed to show up any minute, so Salma headed for the car while her friend went home. Salma has not been seen alive since. Disappearance of a student. When Salma did not return home in the evening, her mother and sister sounded the alarm. She always warned her loved ones if she was going to stay out late or spend the night at a friend's house. About the planned meeting with Kevin, Soledad and Karen did not even guess, because Salma, not wanting to upset them, hid it from them. The student's cell phone was turned off, and after several hours of unsuccessful attempts to reach her, her mother and sister began to call her friends, but they could not help. When the relatives contacted Violet, she said that Salma was going to meet her ex-fiancé, and she drove her to the meeting. At this point, the women realized that something terrible had happened, and it was time to sound the alarm. They immediately, right in the middle of the night, went to the police station, where they reported the disappearance of Salma, as well as their terrible guesses about what might have happened. Law enforcers took the statement of the concerned women seriously and quickly began searching for the missing student. The first thing was questioned Violet, who last saw Salma. She confirmed that she took her friend to meet her ex-fiancé, and they said goodbye in the parking lot, and a couple of hours later, Salma Montes's phone was turned off and unavailable. Kevin, who was visited by the police in the morning, said he saw his ex-fiancée in the parking lot. They talked for a while and went their separate ways. It was obvious that the guy was not telling us something, but he had nothing to show for it. Less than 24 hours had passed since Salma's disappearance, and there was still hope that she would soon turn up alive and unharmed, and there were no good reasons for detention, searches, and interrogations, so the investigators limited themselves to talking outside the station and collecting testimony. Salma's friends, fellow students, and relatives took an active part in the search for her. They pasted flyers with her photos around the city, created posts on social networks, through which they asked to share any relevant information about Salma's whereabouts. The missing person was described as a petite, skinny brunette with light skin and brown eyes. Among the special features mentioned were her tattoos, 3 hearts on her stomach and musical notes on her right arm, as well as a small scar above her eyebrow. She was carrying a cloth backpack with textbooks, notes, and a student ID card, which she always carried with her. A grisly find on the banks of the canal. On June 7, 2019, a badly disfigured and decomposed human body was found on the bank of a canal miles away from the interstate highway, the appearance of which was literally shocking. The hands were missing, the skin had been stripped off in places, the hair had been burned off, and the face had been mutilated beyond recognition. In addition, all teeth had been removed, and no personal belongings or clothing could be found. According to preliminary reports, the cause of death was a deep wound in the neck inflicted by the precise blow of a sharp knife. As a result of this action, the carotid artery was damaged, and the girl literally bled to death in a couple of minutes, and all other injuries were inflicted posthumously. Obviously, the perpetrator did everything possible to make the body unrecognizable, either by fingerprints, dental records, or any special features or external data. Experts only agreed that it was a young girl aged 25 years old, and it was immediately suggested that the body belongs to Salma Montes, who disappeared a week ago and whose story was actively replicated in the press. The mother and sister of the girl were invited to the identification, but they could not recognize their relative in the disfigured corpse. The women simply refused to believe that someone could have treated the kind-hearted and sympathetic Salma so cruelly. In order to unambiguously identify the identity of the victim, required an expensive DNA examination. However, the Montes family had no money for such research, so the test was conducted by a state laboratory, whose equipment left much to be desired, and the probability of error or inaccuracy was quite high. Unfortunately, the results of the examination confirmed that the mutilated body found did indeed belong to the missing student. However, the grief-stricken relatives of the girl still refused to believe it, and announced on social networks to raise funds for a second examination in a private laboratory with more accurate and modern equipment. Hundreds of concerned people responded to their request, and the necessary amount of money was collected quickly enough, but, alas, the retest only confirmed the results of the previous one. It was Salma, the only suspect. Relatives and close friends of the deceased in one voice claimed that she had no enemies or ill-wishers, but at the same time, almost all mentioned her troubled relationship with Kevin Pilcaster, with whom she broke off her engagement about a month before her disappearance. Salma's mother and sister claimed that her ex-fiancé abused and beat her, which is why she decided to break up with him. It would seem that this guy should have been the main, if not the only, suspect from the beginning. But until the body was identified, he remained at large, and his house, car, and personal belongings were not searched, which gave him a great opportunity to get rid of the evidence. Only 2 weeks after Salma's disappearance, and a week after the discovery of her body, Kevin was taken into custody on charges of kidnapping and brutalizing his former fiancée. The young man himself categorically denied his guilt, although he agreed to cooperate with the investigation. However, his testimony has largely changed. The new version and found evidence. In the opinion of forensic experts, an experienced butcher or surgeon worked on the body of the girl. The hands were separated from the body with precise cuts on the joints, which spoke of a good knowledge of anatomy. The skin was also expertly and skillfully removed. As it turned out, the perpetrator removed it in places where there were tattoos, as well as noticeable birthmarks in order to eliminate the possibility of identifying the body by them. Since Kevin had worked as a butcher in the past and had extensive experience in cutting carcasses, the prosecution tried to cling to this thread. But the defendant's lawyers insisted that it was a mere coincidence, and this circumstance could not be used in court as evidence of their client's involvement in the case. According to the new version told by Pilcaster after his arrest, that evening they actually met with his ex-fiancée in a parking lot near his work. They were just talking when suddenly another guy approached them, who, according to Kevin, was Salma's new boyfriend. Allegedly, this guy was jealous of the girl's former fiancée and punched her in the face with a swing. But the defendant stood up for Salma. He told her to take shelter in his van, and he himself decided to deal with the offender in a manly manner. However, the fight had barely started when Salma jumped out of the van and begged Kevin not to hurt her boyfriend. After that, Salma and the stranger left, and Pilcaster went home. The defendant's parents and grandmother, who were called as witnesses, claimed that he returned home at midnight, changed his clothes, and went out with his new girlfriend named Consuela. Soon, the girl herself showed up at the station to confirm Kevin's alibi, saying that on that fateful night he was with her and could not have committed the crime, and then cover his tracks. The van in which the suspect was traveling was seized, and inside the vehicle was found washed-up traces of blood belonging to the deceased. In response, the young man claimed that Salma had gotten the nosebleed after a jealous boyfriend punched her, and she probably left a trail when she hid in the van while the men worked things out. However, according to Salma's family and friends, no new boyfriend has appeared for her since her breakup with her fiancé. She was completely absorbed in her studies, wrote a diploma, and preparing for his defense. By the way, to find this mysterious boyfriend, which Kevin could not even thickly describe, and failed, most likely because he made him up. Despite the new details and Consuela, who came out of nowhere to confirm the alibi of the accused, the whole story looked very strange and unreliable. Nevertheless, the court found that the evidence presented by the prosecution was insufficient to convict. Pilcaster was acquitted and released from the courtroom in August 2019. Escape from the city. Almost immediately after his release, the young man hurriedly left his hometown, and for about 6 months did not give any news of himself at all. This caused a storm of indignation among the relatives of the murdered girl because the case was not closed. The investigation continued, and the only suspect was simply released like this. In fact, letting him escape. As this unprecedentedly brutal case became publicized, and its details were covered in the press for about 2 months, many residents of the city decided to express their support for the Montes family. People gathered at spontaneous rallies, demanding to find Kevin and to reopen the case against him, because he was clearly not telling something, and the story he told was not believable. Salma's family and the activists who helped them succeeded in getting the investigation reopened, and a second search of the suspect's home revealed a hidden cache in the wall containing Kevin's bloody clothes and a large kitchen knife, which he had probably used to kill and then partially cut up his victim. Most likely, he had not had time or was afraid to dispose of this evidence, believing that no one would find it in the stash. At almost the same time, Pilcaster, apparently following the advice of his lawyers, decided to make himself known and go on the attack. He didn't just make himself known, he filed a lawsuit against the Montes family, accusing them of slander, organizing his harassment, and tampering with evidence. The man said he was forced to leave town because he feared for his life because of the harassment organized by Soledad and Karen. In his opinion, the women had turned the entire town against him, and he was simply afraid of being lynched. As evidence, Kevin provided a mass of anonymous, threatening messages that he received on a daily basis, all because his personal information, including his phone number and email address, was published on the internet, as he assumed it was done by relatives of his ex-fiancée. He also claimed that he was being guarded under the house by unknown people who threatened to do away with him and his family. Following the gruesome discovery at the Pilcaster home, Kevin has once again become the prime suspect in the murder case and has once again been taken into custody. At the same time, the man and his lawyers insisted that the evidence was planted on him and also accused the Attorney General of collusion with the Montes family and the deliberate concealment of part of the CCTV footage, which allegedly could prove the innocence of the defendant and confirm his alibi. However, no such recordings were found because they simply did not exist. A new investigation and a protracted trial. Before Kevin could be taken back into custody, it was necessary to overturn his previous acquittal. This process was somewhat protracted because the judge did not want to admit his mistake and insisted that his decision was correct and only right. However, after several sessions, the verdict was overturned, after which a new case was started, taking into account the discovered evidence. In this regard, Kevin's parents and grandmother decided to organize a real press conference, during which, answering questions from journalists, called their family members victims of the machinations of Soledad and Sharon Montes. According to them, these women from the beginning were against the relationship between Kevin and Salma, while the pillcasters loved Salma with all their hearts and already considered her a member of their family. They also claimed that they were literally crushed by the news of the death of the failed daughter-in-law, and soon they were in for another shock when their son was accused of Salma's murder. The suspect himself in the interrogation did not hide the fact that they had a difficult relationship with the former lover and even confirmed that at times raised his hand on her. He justified his actions by the fact that Salma, allegedly, he cheated and he had the right to punish her. He also did not hide that he was annoyed when Salma broke off the engagement, which she, in his opinion, had no right to do because it offended him as a man. A new trial did not begin until June 2020. This time Kevin was charged with kidnapping and aggravated brutal murder motivated by gender-based hate. In fact, he himself led the investigation to this conclusion, constantly repeating, "A woman had no right to act and speak like that." The collected evidence, including the bloody clothes and the knife, which was recognized as the murder weapon, as well as the testimony of witnesses, was enough to convict. And the story previously told by Kevin about Salma's new boyfriend, who, in his opinion, and was the real culprit, simply fell apart because there was no other guy in the parking lot or in the life of Salma. However, the prosecution requested time to complete the investigation, and the court agreed to grant the request. In this regard, it was decided to send the defendant for 6 months of pre-trial detention in a maximum security prison. But due to the coronavirus pandemic that swept the world, the investigation was delayed, and court hearings were repeatedly postponed. So Kevin's 6-month pre-trial detention dragged on for almost 2 years. A fair sentence. It wasn't until May 2023, on the eve of the 4th anniversary of the crime, that a new hearing was held, at which the prosecution presented all the evidence it had managed to uncover in the meantime. In court, several witnesses testified to the fact that Pillcaster abused his fiancée, beat her, and sought to control her every move, depriving her of any freedom. He treated her like a thing that belonged only to him and did not accept the fact that she chose to leave him. On August 16, 2023, Kevin was found guilty of aggravated murder as well as cruelty to the body. As for the kidnapping, this point of the charge, according to the judge, was not proven because Salma herself came to meet with her ex-fiancé and herself could get into his car. Nevertheless, the evidence presented in the courtroom was enough to send a young man to prison for life. More precisely, he was sentenced to 70 years in prison. But if we take into account that at that time the defendant was 32 years old, it is fair to say that such a sentence became for him a life sentence. In addition, Kevin was required to pay the Montes family about $45,000 as moral compensation. Salma's mother and sister later stated that they were quite satisfied with the verdict, although Pillcaster never admitted his guilt, did not repent, and did not explain the motives for his terrible and inhumane act. Beautiful, rich, famous, and successful women are sometimes very unhappy in their personal lives. Just think of the story of the Turkish arabesque performer Belgin Sarılmışır, known under the pseudonym Bergen. The most famous woman in Turkey, famous all over the world, was tortured by her husband for many years. He beat her, disfigured her face with acid, and finally shot her. Our heroine today is Ecuadorian performer, television actress, music producer, and lingerie designer Edith Rosario Barmeo Cisneros, better known as Sharon La Hechicera. or simply Sharon. With her own hard work, perseverance, and talent, she has reached heights that one could only dream of, becoming one of the top stars of Ecuador and Latin America in general. Sharon dreamed of simple female happiness, family comfort, and a quiet harbor where she could return every evening and just be herself. But the man she loved, her husband and the father of her child, saw in her only an inexhaustible source of finances for his trouble-free and carefree life. It was this man who eventually became the culprit of the death of the nation's favorite in 2015. But despite the wide publicity, the final point in this high-profile case has not been put to this day. Sharon La Hexera, biography, early years. The future star was born in 1974, March 28th, in the large metropolis of Santiago de Guayaquil, located on the Guayas River in the province of Ecuador. The full name given to the girl at birth sounds like Edith Rosario Barmeo Cisneros. She grew up in a simple and rather modest family, where in addition to her, there were 2 other children. Soon after the birth of her daughter, the whole family moved to the city of Duran, where the future queen of Technocumbia spent her childhood and youth. Edith, from an early age, was a bright, active, and very artistic girl. At home, she was affectionately called Charo, or Charito, and it was this nickname later became part of her stage name. As a child, Edith was a big fan of the popular American comedy television series Bewitched, another name, My Wife Bewitched Me. Her idol and object of imitation was the main star of this show, the cult actress Elizabeth Montgomery. Then, the same girl began to call herself Charo Enchantress, and dreamed of repeating the success of her favorite actress. From an early age, she became interested in music and loved to sing. She had a good musical ear and not bad vocal data, but to call them outstanding was difficult. Nevertheless, the girl conquered everyone with her natural charisma, artistry, and the ability to reincarnate. At the age of 8, she managed to win at the City Children's Festival, performing compositions Fox in Caico, as well as Los Angeles. By the time she graduated from school, she had already won several awards at city and regional music competitions. She dreamed of becoming a famous singer and conquer the big stage, but her parents were skeptical of these dreams. They believed that the heiress is not talented enough to become a star, and since their family has no connections in show business, the career of a performer is not worth dreaming about. Edith, listening to the advice of her family, decided to go to university, choosing a more practical and down-to-earth profession as a public relations specialist at the State University of Guayaquil at the Faculty of Communication Sciences. But her dream of becoming a singer did not go anywhere. Edith believed that everything has its time, and she should wait a little to choose the most appropriate moment. Path to fame. While studying at university, Edith took on any part-time job and tried herself as an assistant teacher in a kindergarten, a seller of sweets and Morocco, a traditional Ecuadorian drink, as well as a dancer in the local creative team, performing at the warm-up of visiting popular artists and musical groups. But all this was only to save money, which she later used to record her debut music album, Braveheart, which was released in 1998. In 2005, the singer released her 3rd studio album and received the prestigious award as the first solo techno-cumbia artist in the country to top the music charts. In 2010, she released her 4th album entitled Poco a Poco, and 2 years later, her 5th album was released, which unfortunately became the last one in her life and career. From the early 2000s until her tragic death in 2015, Sharon was the author, host, and co-host of many entertainment programs and TV shows on TV channels in Ecuador and other Latin American countries. She has been active in television series and has also worked as a public relations specialist for Canalo TV. In addition to a successful career on the music scene and television, Edith also decided to try herself as a fashion designer, creating seductive lingerie by her own sketches. And in this case, she also waited for success, and the brand she created quickly gained popularity among women almost all over America. For whatever business did not take Sharon, she everywhere succeeded, achieving great heights and recognition. Personal life of the performer. Despite the dizzying success on stage, television, and fashion business, the personal life of one of the main stars of Ecuador was not so rosy. She did not like to touch on this topic in conversations with the press, and in every way avoided such questions from journalists. However, Sharon was constantly in the crosshairs of numerous photo and video cameras, so to hide anything from prying eyes was simply impossible. It is known that in the mid-90s, the aspiring performer was romantically involved with an entrepreneur and music producer named Eduardo Gray. For several years, the couple was officially engaged, but the wedding never came to the wedding, although Edith gave birth to a daughter from her lover. She named her heiress Samantha. The daughter inherited the entrepreneurial vein and artistry of her mother, also becoming quite a famous performer and actress. But to surpass her mother, she failed, despite all the efforts and available connections. Soon after parting with Eduardo, Sharon spun a new romance. This time her chosen one was a little-known television operator with whom she met while working on one of the telenovelas. Their relationship developed rapidly, and after a short engagement, the couple planned a modest wedding, trying to hide this event from others. But the news quickly became public, and the marriage itself lasted a short time. About the reasons for the sudden divorce of the performer preferred to keep silent. Later on, the artist had romantic relationships with a famous impresario named Pedro Francisco, then with a young dancer from the show ballet who performed with her on stage, as well as with some of her star colleagues. Unfortunately, none of these romances did not have a serious continuation, and Sharon broke up with her boyfriends for various reasons. The performer herself did not want to comment on the events that took place in her personal life. She raised a daughter, engaged in career, but still hoped that one day in her life there will be a worthy, loving man. Relationship with Giovanni Lopez. In 2009, the performer met a young man named Giovanni Lopez, who was more than 10 years younger than her. He was also a native of Ecuador, but as a child, together with his parents, emigrated to the United States. The family settled in New York City, where virtually all of Giovanni's childhood and adolescence took place. They first met during a large tour of the singer in the United States, but at that time their communication was limited to work, and Lopez himself helped with the organization of Sharon's performance. But probably, even then, these two have already penetrated some sympathy for each other. In addition, it turned out that the young man was a longtime fan of the Queen of Technocumbia, and he was honored to have the opportunity to work with her personally. A year later, Giovanni decided to return to his native Ecuador. He brought with him the designs he had developed for artists, one of which he created specifically for Sharon. So began their collaboration, and almost immediately a stormy romance broke out between them. At the time of the beginning of this relationship, the performer was already 36 years old, and Giovanni was barely 24 years old. However, the 12-year age difference did not embarrass them at all, and the couple did not care what people around them would think about it and how they will write about them in the press. Almost immediately, the lovers moved in together, deciding to live together. However, it should be noted that the parents and daughter of the performer treated her new chosen one very cautiously. Giovanni immediately they did not like it, and they decided that the young man twisted romance with the star solely for his own selfish purposes, and in fact did not love her at all, but only wanted to use. Sharon listened to the warnings of loved ones did not, because she believed that met the main man in his life, with whom they would live many happy years. Soon the couple married, and the couple began to think about the birth of a common heir. However, here they faced a problem, because the performer could not get pregnant. As a result, she decided to in vitro fertilization, and in May 2012, 38-year-old celebrity gave birth to a boy, who was named Brian Giovanni Lopez, the abusive relationship. Giovanni only at first tried to be a caring and loving man on whom you can rely in everything. However, as soon as the couple concluded marriage and the performer became pregnant, the behavior of the young husband began to change rapidly, and he himself literally turned into a domestic tyrant. He no longer sought to earn money independently, and he was quite satisfied with the position of an Alphonse. He willingly spent his wife's money for his own needs, entertainment, expensive clothes, and care for his appearance. In addition, Lopez began to abuse alcoholic beverages and less often appeared at home, preferring to spend time with friends and mistresses. To all this, Giovanni began to openly insult his wife, pointing to her age and fading beauty. According to some reports, because of his offensive statements and remarks, Sharon decided to do a number of plastic surgeries to preserve her youth and look like her husband. In particular, the performer enlarged her breasts, did a lift, and several cosmetic manipulations, but all her efforts were in vain and did not help to return to the family peace and harmony. Queen of Technocumbia continued to work actively, starred in TV series, posted entertainment shows, as well as preparing material for the recording of a new album. She tried to smile in public and claimed that she was finally happy in her personal life. However, only people close to her knew about how things were really going in her family. In early 2014, when little Brian was not yet 2 years old, the artist made the first serious attempt to break off the relationship with Giovanni. But he said that he would agree to give a divorce only if Sharon will give him half of his property and funds in her bank accounts, so that he, after the separation, could continue to lead an idle and carefree lifestyle to which he was used to. Sharon could not agree to these conditions, and so began to consult with lawyers how to dissolve the marriage, but at the same time, to keep the property and get full custody of their joint young son. By the end of the year, family life became simply unbearable, but the couple continued in public to play the role of happy spouses. One last family trip. On the eve of the New Year 2015, the performer gave a number of festive concerts and also starred together with her star colleagues in several dedicated Christmas and New Year's events. After that, exhausted by work, the young woman decided to arrange a small vacation and go with friends, husband, and son to the warm coast to relax a little, try to gather her thoughts, and decide what to do next. On the evening of January 3rd, 2015, the whole company decided to make the return trip. Since the journey was going to be long and they were traveling by car, the friends decided to follow each other and be in constant contact in case someone needed help. They decided to coordinate all the stops on the way in advance. Sharon had to drive the car that evening because her husband had been drinking alcoholic beverages all day. After a few hours, the company made a stop at a gas station and decided to have dinner there in a roadside cafe. During the meal, the singer and her young husband had a big fight because Giovanni again ordered a drink, although earlier he promised that he would not drink and get behind the wheel, giving Sharon the opportunity to rest and give time to the child. The couple argued for about half an hour and could not agree on who would drive the car. In the end, their friends could not stand it and asked if they could continue on their way. The singer said that she did not want to delay them because of her family problems, so they could go on, and he and Giovanni would have to stay a little longer. The friends reluctantly agreed, and after another half hour headed to their car, leaving the couple at a roadside cafe. They had no idea that they would never see Sharon alive again. Strange accident. On January 4th, around 2:30 in the morning, the friends received a phone call from an agitated Giovanni asking them to come back because there had been an accident and Sharon might be dead. His words were a real shock because he did not specify details and it was completely unclear what had happened on the night road. By the time they returned, emergency services were already on the scene, trying to help the victim and reconstruct the picture of events. According to Giovanni, on the highway Ruta del Spondylus, near the Ecuadorian province of Santa Elena, at about 1:15 a.m., his wife got out of the car to calm her crying son and change his diaper. At that moment, another car crashed into her at a great speed. This car, without even stopping, sped away, leaving the scene of the accident. The young woman was thrown a few dozen meters to the side of the road from the impact. When the ambulance arrived, she was still alive. She was even taken to the hospital, but despite the best efforts of the doctors, Sharon soon died of massive injuries and internal bleeding. Giovanni was still drunk and confused in his testimony, and his story sounded rather strange and not quite logical. The police therefore decided to detain him until morning to question him in detail when he had sobered up. Lopez confirmed the words of friends that he and his wife quarreled all evening and admitted that, contrary to the promises and prohibitions of his wife, defiantly drank alcohol in order not to drive and piss off Sharon. Giovanni's testimony. He did not see the license plate number of the car that hit his wife. He did not even remember the make, and only said that the car was white. There were no CCTV cameras on that stretch of road, No witnesses could be found, and the accident itself looked suspicious because Sharon did not even turn to the side of the road before leaving the cabin and did not make sure of safety. Although on a straight deserted road, any vehicle can be seen and heard from afar, even at night. The longer the police tried to correlate all the facts with Lopez's story, the more what had happened resembled not an accident, but a premeditated murder. Giovanni was confused about the timing and chronology of events, could not remember details, but most interestingly, he could not explain why their car was turned in the opposite direction to the route they were traveling. After another interrogation, the husband of the dead singer was arrested as the main suspect in the case of her death. The autopsy results and Sharon's funeral. The autopsy revealed that the deceased woman's body had numerous injuries typical of a victim of a traffic accident. However, experts also found a clear and fairly deep mark on Sharon's chest that could have been left by a seatbelt. This fact raised even more questions and suspicions. Samantha, who spent New Year's holidays in the company of her boyfriend, learned about the tragedy from singer Sonia Ramos, a close friend and colleague of her mother. The girl could not believe that all this is really happening. She called her father, Eduardo Gray, and asked him to come to her as soon as possible so that they went to Sharon's home together and began preparations for the funeral. After making all the preliminary arrangements, the body of the celebrity was taken to the Coliseum Cerrado Voltaire Paladines Polo in the province of Guayaquil. To say goodbye to one of the brightest stars of Ecuador came thousands of her friends, colleagues, and fans. Also, this sad event was covered in all leading publications of the country, and on television was even announced a one-day mourning. Grief-stricken Samantha sobbed on the shoulder of her father, and near were her grandmother, grandfather, and uncle and aunt. All members of the deceased celebrity's family refused to comment in any way on what had happened. None of them accused Giovanni of what happened directly, but all of them showed their negative attitude towards him. An investigation and a surprise court decision. The case was one of the most high-profile in Ecuador's history. It was widely covered in the press and jeopardized the reputation of the country's judicial system. The initial verdict literally shocked relatives and fans of the celebrity, and the revision of the case was delayed so much that the final point in this matter has not been put to this day. So, the white car, which presumably hit the artist, was found a few days later. The car had characteristic damage which, as experts have established, could be obtained as a result of an accident if you hit a person at high speed. The owner of the vehicle was a young woman named Tatiana Chavez, who categorically denied her involvement in the accident. However, the prosecutor's office opened 2 criminal cases at once: negligent homicide against Tatiana and premeditated murder against Giovanni. Lopez's story sounded extremely unconvincing. He was confused and contradicted himself, then recognized the car and even claimed to have seen the driver, then again doubted his own words, referring to alcohol intoxication. In parallel, the daughter and parents of the deceased also filed a statement, blaming the singer's husband for the incident. In their opinion, he never loved Sharon and had a motive for the murder in order to seize her money and get custody of the child. Samantha noted that her mother, shortly before the tragedy, consulted with lawyers about the dissolution of the marriage. Samantha also added that her little brother, who was the only witness to the incident, cries all the time and repeats, "Daddy is bad." However, they did not involve the child as a witness in order not to cause the boy even more psychological trauma. After a detailed reconstruction of the events of that evening, Tatiana was ruled out as a suspect. By comparing the times and places where Tatiana had been seen before and after the accident, it was determined that she could not have been physically near the accident site at that time, and her car had been damaged in another accident. The other car was soon found to be the one that was found to have hit Sharon. The owner, Luis Correo, who had been driving that night, was arrested. By that time, he had already managed to replace the broken headlight and repair other body damage, but experts were able to establish that at the scene of the accident were found shards of glass from his car. Luis himself admitted to everything and said that Sharon literally fell under the wheels of his car, and he was so scared of what happened that he just drove away. In June 2015, Giovanni was found guilty of manslaughter of his wife. Experts proved that the injury on the woman's chest from the seat belt was caused by her trying to protect herself before her husband pushed her out of the car, right under the wheels of another car. However, the court verdict shocked Sharon's relatives and fans because her killer was only given 3 years. A retrial and attempts to appeal the new verdict. Such a lenient sentence caused a storm of excitement in the media and provoked a lot of protests across the country. People demanded fair punishment for the murderer of the star and national favorite. Already in July of the same year, the judges involved in the case were suspended and subsequently dismissed. The new judicial staff canceled the previous verdict, arguing that a number of administrative and bureaucratic mistakes had been made. All attempts by the defense lawyers to challenge the reversal of the verdict were unsuccessful. Luis Carrera was cleared of responsibility for the singer's death, but he was still charged with fleeing the scene and attempting to conceal evidence. But Giovanni Lopez was brought to every court session under heavy security in order to avoid attacks on him fans of Sharon. In October 2015, the husband of the singer was found guilty of her death and sentenced to 26 years in prison. The court also took into account the evidence provided by Samantha evidence of Giovanni's cruel treatment of her mother, as well as the fact that he blackmailed his wife, demanding from her a fabulous sum for consent to divorce. A few months later, 2 appeals were filed at once. The prosecution demanded to increase the term to the maximum, 35 years, and the lawyers insisted on the illegality of the new sentence. However, both complaints were rejected. In 2021, Lopez again tried to challenge the court's decision. In addition, he stated that he was subjected to ill treatment in prison and his rights were grossly violated. The prisoner even went on a hunger strike to pressure the court to release him. He argued that he was wrongfully convicted and the main perpetrator of the tragedy, Luis Carrera, remained free. In 2023, Giovanni, already with a new lawyer, appealed again, once again hoping to secure his release. It is worth noting that in this difficult case, the composition of the judges was again changed due to the revealed abuse of power. Therefore, Lopez's defense hopes not only to challenge the verdict, but also to seek compensation for the years spent in prison. Over the years, however, the definition has evolved and varies across countries, depending on cultural context. In most places, it is classified as a severe crime against women, including assault, maiming, or causing death, perpetrated by men amid gender-based animosity. It's often said that women allow themselves to be mistreated, not reporting to police or leaving the men who cause them emotional and physical suffering, and sometimes even continuing to live with someone who might end their life at any moment. This claim is only partially true, as in some countries, the law inherently sides with men, giving them confidence that they will face no repercussions. The story of a young woman named Abil Perez is one of the most vivid examples of how femicide thrives among the affluent sectors of Mexican society. She and her husband, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, were wealthy and respected individuals, holding executive positions in major companies, and from the outside, their marriage seemed flawless. Yet this did not prevent the man from abusing his wife over the years and eventually having someone else violently end her life, also risking the lives of their children. To this day, this case remains unresolved, and all but the main perpetrator have been punished. Abil Perez, family and early years. Abril Sagaon. Perez was born on November 18, 1971, in Monterrey, in the northeastern part of Mexico, and was the second of 3 children to parents Maria del Socorro Sagaon and Manuel Perez. Raised alongside her older brother Javier and younger sister Ama, the family lived modestly, but her parents did everything possible to provide their children with a good education and motivate them to aspire to a better life. All the children excelled in school, engaged in music, sports, and other talents. Abril, in particular, showed a talent for mathematics and entrepreneurial skills from an early age. She was an avid reader and the top student in her class. As a teenager, Abril began working to achieve financial independence, was frugal, and always had savings. From her school days, she was very disciplined, able to plan and manage her time effectively. She dreamed of obtaining a high-quality higher education to secure a well-paying job with career advancement opportunities. After finishing high school, Abil was admitted to the most prestigious university in Nuevo León, where she earned a master's degree in finance and business administration. Her classmates described her as smart, incredibly focused and ambitious, but also cheerful, kind-hearted, and always ready to help others. Upon graduating, Perez was hired in the sales department of one of the country's largest and fastest-growing companies. A few years later, she ventured into digital sales, a new booming field, and realized this was her calling. Quickly rising through the ranks, she became the executive director of the company within 2 years. Abil was young, beautiful, successful, ambitious, and steadily advancing towards the life she had always dreamed of. She built a brilliant career, supported her family, and was full of plans for the future. Yet her personal life remained unsettled, which disappointed her loved ones. Nevertheless, she was confident she would find true love and live a long, happy life. Little did Perez know how her marriage to the perfect man would turn out. Meeting Juan Carlos in the mid-1990s, as Abil's career was on the rise, fate brought her together with a young man named Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. He was just 3 years her senior and equally ambitious career-wise, which greatly appealed to her. In return, he was captivated by her beauty, charm, kindness, and disarming smile, combined with a sharp intellect and remarkable determination. Sanchez was a graduate of a prestigious science and technology university, where he excelled in the economics and trade department. He later continued his education in the United States at Harvard University, after which he returned to Mexico and built a successful career in the relatively new field of e-commerce. The young professionals met at a conference dedicated to the latest financial technologies. They crossed paths several more times as their companies collaborated on joint projects, and eventually, Juan Carlos realized he had fallen in love with this intelligent beauty. Through mutual acquaintances, he obtained her phone number and decided to invite Perez out on a date. The feelings were mutual. She also found this educated, erudite man capable of holding a conversation on almost any topic, appealing and interesting. Their relationship developed quickly, and by 1998 the couple decided to formalize their relationship with a lavish wedding. By then, they had both achieved considerable career success and were involved in developing online stores, a very promising direction. Their life resembled a true fairy tale, evoking envy and admiration among their peers. Dark secrets of the perfect family. It wasn't until 2001, after 3 years of marriage, that the couple welcomed their long-awaited first child, a daughter they named Anna Cecilia. 30-year-old Abil was overjoyed, as the arrival of the child marked a new chapter in their lives. Her husband also seemed happy, treating their newborn daughter with tenderness and awe. 2 years later, Abil gave her beloved a son, whom they named after his father, Juan Carlos Jr. Another 2 years passed, and the family welcomed a third child, a boy named Julio Andreas. It's worth noting that the young mother hardly took any maternity leave and managed to brilliantly combine parental responsibilities with her career advancement. She prepared only homemade meals, helped the children with their schoolwork, took them to sports activities, and strived to be not just an ideal mother, but also their best friend. From the outside, the Perez Sanchez family appeared perfect in every way. Wealthy, successful, raising 3 wonderful children, having everything one could wish for, and seeming very happy. But appearances can be deceiving. What happened inside their home remained unknown even to the couple's closest relatives for a long time. In reality, Juan Carlos showed his true nature in the first years of their life together. He was hot-tempered, aggressive, and rather harsh, intolerant of compromise, insisting that everything had to be exactly as he wanted. But Abil was in love, and initially thought that over time they would rub along, and his character would soften. Moreover, their joint projects united them. They worked towards a common goal, and their teamwork yielded impressive results, including financially. However, over time, he became more irritable, and verbal altercations escalated into physical confrontations. After the birth of their first daughter, the husband briefly softened, trying to keep his emotions in check, but it didn't last long. The same happened after the birth of their eldest son. But by the time the third child was born, he no longer even tried to be a good father or husband. Juan Carlos vented his anger, negative emotions, or just bad mood on his wife, sparing no feelings. He insulted and belittled the mother of his children, and her tears seemed to lift his spirits. He then began to regularly physically harm his wife, often doing so in a way that left no visible marks on exposed parts of her body, so she could hide the bruises under clothing or mask them with makeup. All this was done with one simple purpose: to protect his flawless reputation and pride himself on being considered a model family man, loving husband, and father. Abil kept silent for years, trying not to tell even her sister and mother about the ongoing nightmare. She earned well and could have raised the children on her own, providing them with a good education and a stable upbringing. But her husband was a wealthy and very influential man, and he could easily take the children away from her through the courts. Knowing what Juan Carlos was really like, Perez could not bear the thought of her daughter and sons being left alone with a real monster, capable of anything, starting over with old problems. 2010 approached. The situation within the family escalated to its limit, to the extent that those who once considered this household ideal began to suspect something terrible was happening within. Abil was not just subdued, but deeply distressed, visibly thinner, sleeping poorly, and frequently had bruises on her face and body that became increasingly difficult to conceal and impossible for her to explain. Juan Carlos maintained a calm and confident demeanor, pretending that nothing was wrong. In public, he continued to play the role of a loving and caring husband, interacting with his wife politely and affectionately, but at home, he transformed into a monster, making it increasingly dangerous to be near him. Despite pleas from loved ones to divorce, Abil stubbornly insisted that everything was fine and that she would handle the problems with her husband herself. 2014 marked the peak of Sanchez's career when he became the head of a major trading company and one of the most influential people in the field. After this promotion, the family moved to Mexico City and settled in a large house in one of the capital's best neighborhoods. Their children attended an elite private school, and a beleaguered Perez sincerely hoped that the move and complete change in scenery would positively affect their relationship. Contrary to expectations, changed. The man continued to physically harm and insult his wife, increasingly doing so in front of their children. Furthermore, Juan Carlos began to groundlessly accuse his wife of infidelity, and whenever she tried to defend herself, he resorted to using his fists, claiming he would find evidence of her disloyalty. He monitored her phone and emails, forbade her from using social media, and later, finding no evidence, even hired a private detective to follow Abil and photograph any men who came near her. 2 attempts on her life. For another 4 years, the woman tried everything to save her marriage, though her husband's behavior became utterly unbearable. She lived in a never-ending nightmare that outwardly seemed like a happy and successful union. Many even envied Abil, as she had such a prominent, influential, wealthy, and as many thought, caring husband. In 2018, the Sanchez family traveled to Monterrey to celebrate Catholic Christmas with the Perez family. However, Juan Carlos behaved toward his wife as he was accustomed, not shying away from her parents, who were horrified by what they witnessed. At that moment, the woman realized things could not continue this way and informed her husband that she would file for divorce once they returned to Mexico City. Hearing this, in a fit of rage, he grabbed her throat and squeezed so tightly she nearly lost consciousness. Only her mother, Maria del Socorro, entering the room and raising the alarm, prevented a tragedy. When the family returned to their home in the capital, Abil, preparing for divorce, moved from the marital bedroom to a small guest room, but this did not save her from the tyrant. On the morning of January 4th, while she was still asleep, her husband entered the bedroom holding a baseball bat. He struck her hard on the head and was about to swing again. Half awake, Perez barely understood what was happening, but managed to slip off the bed just in time, literally saving her own life. The woman began to scream, and the children ran into the room, having heard the noise. The youngest son shielded his mother with his body, while the eldest son took the bat from his father. Together with their mother, they fled the house and headed to the hospital as Abil needed medical attention. Doctors diagnosed her with a serious concussion and a deep laceration above her eyebrow, which required stitches. Marital conflict. As soon as his wife and sons left the home, Juan Carlos contacted his lawyer to explain the situation and asked for help in resolving it. He also posted on his social media page, claiming that his wife had betrayed him, was unfaithful, and intended to leave him for another man, taking their children and attempting to take all their jointly acquired assets. Moreover, he claimed that his wife had stolen all the money from their home safe and that when he tried to stop her, she injured him with a knife in the shoulder. As proof, he posted photos of a bloodied knife and brown stains on the floor. However, the blood on the floor was actually Abil's from her own room, and the knife photo was taken from the internet. Nonetheless, Sanchez's friends believed his story and began actively sharing and reposting his account on their personal social media pages, calling for widespread attention to this egregious case. While still in the hospital, Perez filed a police report against her husband, accusing him of attempting to end her life. After being discharged, she moved out of their home, taking her sons with her, over whom she was granted temporary sole custody. Their eldest daughter, by then an adult who had finished school and moved to another city for college, also sided with her mother, condemning her father's cruel and unacceptable behavior. Sanchez was ordered to pay alimony to his ex-wife and sons while they stayed with their mother, although the amount was quite small, about $300, which he disagreed with. He himself faced a potential prison sentence, but the influential businessman was confident he would remain free and avoid any punishment. After enduring such a nightmare, Abil decided to return to her native Monterrey, to her parents' home, taking her children with her. It was there that she filed for divorce, and from there she monitored the situation. Meanwhile, she began offering help and online consultations to women in similar situations, and she planned to open a center for psychological and legal assistance for victims of domestic violence. Corrupt justice system. Only in September 2019, 8.5 months after the incident, was Sanchez finally arrested on charges of femicide, inflicting bodily harm and attempting to end his wife's life. He was placed in jail, where he spent over a month, but by November of that year, he managed to appeal the pretrial detention decision and was released. The case was presided over by Judge Federico Mas, who unexpectedly reclassified it, leading to a new trial. During the trial, photographs of Perez from the hospital and entries from her medical records were not presented, and the testimonies of the woman and her sons were deemed insufficient grounds for detaining Juan Carlos. Furthermore, the defendant insisted that his ex-wife was turning the children against him. The defendant was released directly from the courtroom, as Judge Mas considered that his actions did not pose a direct threat to the victim's life. According to the judge, if Sanchez had truly intended to end his wife's life, he would have followed through, especially since she was asleep during the attack and unable to resist. Abil was shocked and frightened by this turn of events. She realized that her ex-husband had utilized all his connections and paid off the right people to be set free, putting her and her children in danger. She sent an official letter to the judge expressing fear for her life, but it had no impact on the situation. Immediately after being released, Juan Carlos began legal proceedings against his ex-wife for custody of their sons. He forced her and the children to return to Mexico City to attend court sessions. Otherwise, the matter could be resolved in absentia, not in her favor, so she was compelled to return to the capital. Tragedy. Witnessed by children. On November 25th, Abil arrived in Mexico City with her children. She genuinely feared the man she had lived with for over 20 years and did not want to encounter him unnecessarily. She planned to leave the city the same day after the hearing and had already purchased plane tickets, which Juan Carlos knew about. Ironically, on that day, a mass demonstration against gender-based violence was taking place in the capital. Immediately after the court session, The woman, along with her sons and their lawyer, got into a car heading to the airport, but they never reached their destination. At a traffic light, a motorcyclist pulled up next to their car, unexpectedly drew a handgun, and fired twice at Perez, who was sitting in the front passenger seat, before swiftly fleeing the scene. One of the bullets passed through and grazed the younger son, who was sitting in the back seat, but fortunately, none of the children were seriously hurt. The injured woman was quickly taken to the nearest hospital, where doctors fought desperately for over 6 hours to save her life. Unfortunately, due to severe injuries and significant blood loss, they were unable to save 48-year-old Abil, who passed away that evening. The victim's parents, brother, and sister flew to the capital immediately and urged authorities to arrest Juan Carlos, convinced that he was behind this brutal act that occurred in front of the children. However, law enforcement had a different view, stating that without identifying the shooter, it was difficult to discuss his motives, and it could not be definitively claimed that it was a hitman sent by Sanchez. The case was not classified as femicide until further investigation. Predictably, Juan Carlos remained free, and the police began searching for the shooter, which could take an extended period. The orphaned children were temporarily placed under the care of their maternal relatives, while their father prepared to fight for them in court again. Abil's sister wrote an angry post on her social media account openly blaming Sanchez for the incident, but her page was soon blocked and later deleted. Nonetheless, the family decided to fight and draw heightened public attention to the case, highlighting that the attack on Perez happened on the day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence, public outcry, and the flight of the main suspect. The victims' relatives managed to draw attention to the tragedy that struck their family. Moreover, people openly discussed numerous cases where men attempted to end women's lives, but did not follow through and remained free without facing any punishment. Due to the significant public outcry, the General Prosecutor's Office of Mexico initiated a new investigation concerning Sanchez and was also instructed to check the legality of the actions of the judges who had released him. The judges handling Juan Carlos's case were temporarily suspended from work and later removed from their positions. Mexican politician and women's rights defender Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo officially confirmed that the Perez case had been reclassified as femicide and would be reinvestigated, and the judges who had released Juan Carlos could face consequences for the woman's death if his guilt was proven. The businessman regularly posted on social media calling for the perpetrator of his former wife to be found and punished to the fullest extent of the law. He also noted that despite the disagreements between him and Abil, he would never dare harm the mother of his children, let alone end her life in front of their sons. However, his daughter Anna Cecilia left an angry comment under one of these posts, accusing her father of cruelty and accompanying her words with photos of her mother taken in the hospital after Juan Carlos had attacked her with a bat. Despite the resonance and widespread media coverage of the case, it was decided to leave Sanchez free during the investigation. He was placed under a restraining order and required to check in weekly at a police station, but after he failed to appear at the appointed time, a warrant for his arrest was issued for violating the order. As one might guess, no one could find the accused. It turned out that the businessman again used his money and connections to quickly leave the country and enter the United States. Mexican authorities contacted Interpol, reporting the fugitive accused of a serious crime, and the next day, Sanchez was declared wanted almost worldwide. Arrest of hired criminals and reconstruction of the crime scene. During this time, efforts were underway to locate the hired criminal who, it turned out, did not work alone. Surveillance footage from street cameras clearly showed 2 vehicles following the car from the courthouse, in which Abil, her children, and their lawyer were traveling. The motorcyclist, who later emerged and performed the lethal act, appeared to be in constant communication with the individuals in the aforementioned cars, receiving directions and instructions. It took investigators several months to identify just some of the participants of the incident, and it wasn't until March 5, 2020, that 2 suspects were arrested in connection to the case. Surprisingly, they did not resist arrest and almost immediately started giving testimonies, hoping to mitigate their sentences. It was confirmed that the orchestrator of the crime was indeed Juan Carlos, who had paid a substantial amount, with 7 people directly involved in carrying out the act. The first to be apprehended were the driver of one of the chase cars and the motorcyclist who fired the fatal shots. It emerged that, while in prison, Juan Carlos had hired a couple of seasoned criminals to protect him, acting as his personal bodyguards. One of these criminals was released a week before Sanchez, and the other was freed several days after him. Once out of prison, the businessman reconnected with them, asking them to find reliable people to carry out the elimination of a person, promising a substantial sum of money to each if successful. When all participants were identified, the orchestrator transferred the promised money and provided precise instructions about the route and vehicle Abil would be using. The most challenging part of the plan turned out to be luring his former wife to Mexico City. The man resorted to blackmail, threatening to take the children if she did not appear in court. Although she complied with the court appearance, she had no intention of staying in the capital, planning to return to Monterrey the same day, and Juan Carlos knew this from his sources. Despite this information, it wasn't until the end of October 2020 that 3 more participants in the criminal conspiracy were apprehended. Moreover, the arrest of these criminals was initially on suspicion of distributing controlled substances, and it was only at the police station that it was discovered these individuals could be involved in the high-profile crime. All arrested were part of a major drug trafficker, Juan Carlos Maldonado's gang, known as Juan Balto. He had served time with Sanchez and provided him protection, later agreeing to assist in eliminating his former wife for a hefty reward. Maldonado was arrested a couple of weeks later in November 2020. He began giving testimonies, confirming that the businessman had sought reliable individuals to end his ex-wife's life, and he agreed to help him in return for a substantial reward. There was no doubt left that Sanchez was both the client and organizer of the crime, and his previous assault on Abil with a bat was officially reclassified as an attempt on her life, leading the court to finally issue an arrest warrant for him on charges of femicide. However, the man's whereabouts remained unknown. By spring 2021, the remaining participants in the commissioned perpetration of Perez were found and arrested. Notably, one of them was already serving a sentence for another crime at the time. Also, during extensive searches, the weapon used to make the fatal shots was found. In total, 9 people associated with the same criminal group were detained, 7 of whom were directly involved in chasing and shooting Abil. Almost 5 years after the woman's death, the main culprit and client of the crime, Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez, remains at large, with his whereabouts still undetermined. The individual who pulled the trigger, ending the life of a mother of 3, was sentenced to 52 years in prison. 2 other criminals who chased the car and coordinated the shooter's actions were also sentenced to 50 years each. The other arrested participants of the incident are still under investigation, and their fate has yet to be decided. A paradise beach turned into a death trap for lovers. It is believed that an investigation on the heels of a crime is the most effective and often leads to success. The methodology itself implies immediate response, operational collection of evidence, and questioning of witnesses, which significantly increases the chances of quickly solving the case and holding the guilty accountable. However, if it is not possible to identify the perpetrator, the investigation can drag on for years and even decades until the criminal case is frozen and transferred to the archive after the statute of limitations expires. However, sometimes unsolved and seemingly hopeless investigations receive unexpected developments many years later, which helps to find the right lead and achieve results when no one believed it anymore. The case of Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen, which had been gathering dust on the shelves for almost 15 years, is a prime example of this. At the time, it was not possible to solve it despite the operational actions of the investigative team and the high reward offered for any information. The main problem was the lack of motive for such a brutal act against the loving couple. In addition to this, it was not possible to find any witnesses, murder weapons, or any significant clues. It was a typical dead end, and no one hoped that the truth would ever be discovered. However, a decade and a half later, solving this case was helped by another brutal crime. It also turned out that at least 4 people knew what had happened, but all these years, they remained silent. Who were Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen? Lindsay Cutshall was born in the small town of White Eyes in Coshocton County, Ohio, in 1982. She grew up in a very religious family, and her father was a pastor of a Christian community. Despite a strict upbringing from childhood, she was very active, engaged in sports, and later became interested in hiking and extreme tourism. After finishing school, Lindsay became a student at Appalachian Bible College in West Virginia. During those years, she regularly climbed mountains of various difficulty levels, rafted down turbulent mountain rivers, and even organized hikes herself. The young woman dreamed of founding her own summer camp for children and teenagers, where she could teach them the basics of survival in the wild, rafting, tourism, and so on. Jason Allen was born in the city of Zeeland, in the American state of Michigan, in 1978. He also grew up in a deeply religious family, and from a teenage age was seriously interested in hiking tours, mastering survival in the wild. The young man was tall, athletic, toned, possessed leadership qualities, and was able to find like-minded people to conquer new heights. The couple met in 2002 during a hiking trip in the Appalachians. At that time, Lindsay was still a student, while Jason worked as a mountain guide and climbing instructor. The young people immediately felt mutual sympathy, and just 6 months after their first meeting, the young man came to the girl's parents and asked for their daughter's hand in marriage. Her parents were not opposed and gave their blessing to the lovers. The young man's parents also approved of his choice, after which the couple was officially engaged. Allen presented the young woman with a beautiful diamond ring for this occasion, which was soon to be complemented by another, an engagement ring. The young couple planned to get married in September 2004, had big plans for their future together, and wanted to buy their own large house where they could live comfortably and raise their children. Unfortunately, these plans were not meant to come true. The final trip. In the summer of 2004, Lindsay and Jason worked as senior counselors at a Christian summer camp called Rock and Water, located in El Dorado County, California. After their wedding, they planned to open their own similar camp, so they were gaining experience and learning the nuances of working with the younger generation. On the evening of Friday, August 14th of that year, the couple decided to take a weekend trip to the San Francisco area. They informed their colleagues of their plans in advance, leaving 2 of the most experienced counselors in charge of the camp. Lindsay and Jason promised to return by Monday, so their short journey was expected to cause no complications either for the couple or for their temporary replacements. They set off in a 1992 red Ford Tempo, owned by Lindsay, and that was the last time anyone saw them alive. By Sunday evening, the counselors had not returned to the camp, but no alarm was raised then, as everyone was confident that the couple would arrive either late at night or early Monday morning. However, when it was discovered after the morning roll call at 8 a.m. that Jason and Lindsay were still missing and their phones were unreachable, their colleagues decided to contact the police and also inform the missing couple's families about the situation. The parents, horrified upon hearing the news, rushed to the camp to learn more about the incident. Everyone knew that the couple was very responsible in their duties. They were never late, and if any unforeseen circumstances had occurred, they would have found a way to communicate that. The challenging search. Upon arrival at the camp, law enforcement officials interviewed the couple's colleagues, and the investigation immediately encountered a serious problem. No one could precisely say where the young couple had gone. It was only known that they planned to explore around San Francisco, and given their great love for adventure and extreme leisure, they could be in the most remote corners where there was neither communication nor civilization. While the police waited the legally mandated 2 days during which the missing were expected to report themselves, relatives and friends decided not to just sit back, but to organize a search themselves. They called everyone they knew, trying to find out when the couple last made contact with anyone, distributed flyers with photos of the bride and groom, and requested anyone who might have seen them to respond immediately. By Tuesday, law enforcement had joined the search operation. The main search unfolded around San Francisco, its suburbs and surroundings. However, the area was vast, and it was simply not possible to thoroughly comb through it. Then, one of the friends noted that the couple loved the wild, rocky beaches that were always beautiful and secluded, prompting the police to focus on these areas. Bodies in sleeping bags. For several days, the search yielded no results, and the hope of finding the couple alive was diminishing rapidly. Then, on Wednesday, August 19th, a patrol helicopter flying over one of the rocky, wild beaches reported that 2 bodies were found in sleeping bags on the desolate coast, and it seemed unlikely they were just resting there. The first thing police encountered upon arriving at the scene was a red Ford Tempo parked on a cliff near a lookout point in a small shelter for tourists, from which a steep trail led directly to the scenic wild beach. The car was immediately checked in the database and found to belong to the missing student, Lindsay Cutshall. Descending the trail to the beach, law enforcement found 2 bright sleeping bags containing individuals. At first, it might have seemed they were merely sleeping, but no response came to calls or noise. Approaching closer, the officers saw that the sleeping bags contained a young man and woman, both showing no signs of life. A brief initial examination suggested that their lives had been taken by gunshot wounds to the head, and given the distinctive smell of decomposition, they had been there for more than a day. All the belongings of the deceased, including mobile phones and wallets containing bank cards and cash, were found beside them. Therefore, a robbery as the main motive was almost immediately ruled out. The keys to the parked car above were also visibly placed, ruling out car theft as a motive. Investigators immediately suspected that the deceased were the same young people who had gone missing last week near San Francisco. Their suspicion was confirmed by documents found nearby under the names Lindsay Cutshall and Jason Allen, but the bodies still needed to be identified by relatives. The arriving parents of the couple, who had hoped until the last that the remains belonged to someone else, were devastated by grief upon recognizing their children. Investigation and initial theories. Thus, theories involving robbery or an attempted carjacking were dismissed since all valuables, money, and keys were left untouched in plain sight. Moreover, forensic analysis revealed no signs of physical assault or intimate assault on the bodies, except for the gunshot wounds to the head. It appeared that Lindsay and Jason were simply sleeping peacefully at the time of the incident and did not have a chance to react. They made no attempt to defend themselves, flee, or even get out of their sleeping bags. Everything pointed to a swift act that resembled an execution or vendetta. But who could have taken the lives of 2 individuals in such a brutal manner, and why? The questions multiplied, but no answers were forthcoming. There were no signs that anyone else had stayed in the area. The beach was quite secluded, and accessing it via the steep trail was challenging. Despite efforts, no shell casings were found nearby, leading investigators to theorize that the shooter either took them or threw them into the ocean. The shots had been fired at close range into the heads of the sleeping tourists, indicated by specific traces, so the casings, if not deliberately moved, would have been nearby. Interestingly, the beach appeared quite clean, yet a few meters from where the sleeping bags with the bodies were found, an empty beer bottle lay. The deceased did not drink alcohol as they led a healthy lifestyle, suggesting the bottle might belong to the mysterious shooter. This particular brand of beer was rarely found in the area and likely came from a neighboring state. As no other clues were found, this bottle was considered a significant lead, although it was unclear whether it had any connection to the shooter or the crime. A theory was proposed that the deceased might have had a conflict with someone the day before the tragedy, and their opponent returned at night with a weapon to settle the score. Although Jason and Lindsay were very friendly with everyone, it was not excluded that they might have inadvertently displeased someone either in appearance or for some other reason. Additionally, the shooter could have been intoxicated or mentally unstable. From the bullets extracted from the victims' skulls, experts determined they were fired from a Marlin brand rifle, .45 caliber, model 1894, produced by Marlin Firearms Company. This was a rare weapon that might have been part of a collector's arsenal. Such models were typically used for hunting. This clue was significant for the ongoing investigation, but it remained the only one for the time being. Investigators speculated that the shooter was likely a male acting alone. He could have been a hunter, collector, or firearm enthusiast. The couple's route, search, and witness interviews. The investigation now aimed to establish the route the couple had taken, who they might have contacted, and when they were last seen alive. The first task presented few issues, as the couple had taken numerous photos, and their camera remained untouched among their personal belongings. Additionally, in the tourist cabin near the lookout point where they parked their car, there was a guest book where visitors could leave notes. The engaged couple had written a couple of entries expressing that it was one of the best weekends of their lives, filled with love, happiness, and the discovery of perhaps the most beautiful beach they had ever seen. It was discovered that on Saturday the couple had stopped at a fishing pier about 20 miles from where their lives were ultimately taken. This was evidenced by the photographs they had taken there, prompting law enforcement to visit the area and speak with locals in search of potential witnesses. Many remembered the young couple traveling in a red car. They were looking for a place to stay overnight, but found no vacancies in any of the 3 nearby hotels. This was because August is peak tourist season in the area, and most travelers book their accommodations well in advance. The couple then dined at a local restaurant, walked around the area, took several photos, and set off again in the evening. According to everyone who saw and interacted with them, they were friendly, engaged in no conflicts, and appeared happy and carefree. None of the witnesses could recall anything suspicious or unusual. Notably, the beach where the bodies were found was located in a protected area where camping was prohibited. However, since the young people could not find a place to stay overnight, they decided to settle on the beach, but chose not to set up a tent, instead using their sleeping bags. They believed that on a warm August night on a secluded beach, they faced no threats, and planned to head back at dawn to return to the Rock and Water camp on Sunday as promised. This information helped narrow down the time frame during which the couple was likely taken from life. They went to sleep but did not survive until morning, indicating they were likely taken from life between 11 o'clock Saturday night and dawn on Sunday. The first suspect. Although the investigation into the double taking of life was in full swing and news broadcasts urged anyone with any relevant information to contact the police, law enforcement withheld certain details. In particular, the results of the ballistics analysis were kept secret to avoid alerting the suspect and prompting them to hastily dispose of the weapon used in the crime. Initially, suspicion fell on a local drifter who periodically slept on that very beach and had been seen nearby on the evening before the crime. The homeless man, mentioned by some witnesses, was quickly located, brought to the station, and interrogated. The 57-year-old suspect had no alibi for the night of the crime. However, his involvement could not be confirmed. The main reasons were the absence of the weapon used in the crime and the fact that his DNA did not match that found on the beer bottle discovered on the beach. A new phase of the investigation in 2006. For nearly 2 years, the investigation had been at a standstill with no clear direction on how to proceed. Then, in the spring of 2006, law enforcement decided to publicize the data they had on the weapon used in the crime and to reach out again to potential witnesses by offering a $50,000 reward for any useful information that could lead to the perpetrator. Following this announcement, about 1,000 calls came in, but most did not aid the advancement of the investigation. However, law enforcement became interested in 26-year-old Sean Gallen, pointed out by several locals. According to them, the young man collected firearms and bladed weapons, behaved aggressively, was frequently involved in conflicts, threatened acts of violence, and occasionally damaged other people's property. Sean was arrested and questioned. He had previously been on the police's radar for brawling, hooliganism, and driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs. He indeed had an impressive collection of weapons, but the specific rifle in question was not among them. Verifying his alibi from 2 years prior proved impossible, and his DNA did not match the sample found on the beer bottle at the crime scene, so Gallen had to be released. A suspect from another country? Simultaneously, another suspicious and aggressive drifter came under scrutiny, often seen with a firearm, frightening the local residents. His name was Joseph Henry Burgess, and he was 61 years old at the time of the couple's demise. Burgess often ranted about receiving commands from God. It was discovered that in the late 1970s, Joseph lived in Canada, where he also wandered aimlessly. In 1978, he joined the Commune of the Children of God, positioning himself as a deeply religious person, and according to those around him, he was quite the fanatic. He soon had a conflict with two young people that escalated into outright enmity, and a few weeks later, these individuals were found lifeless, each with several close-range gunshot wounds to the head. Notably, their bodies were also discovered on a beach in sleeping bags, seemingly taken while they slept. By the time the police arrived, Burgess had vanished. His guilt was proven through numerous left-behind clues, but he could not be convicted as he had fled to the USA, crossing the border illegally. He managed to evade capture for nearly a quarter of a century until the police connected him with the double homicide on a beach in California. However, they were unable to interrogate him as a shootout occurred during his apprehension, resulting in the deaths of a police sergeant and Burgess himself who opened fire. A fatal echo from the past. In the spring of 2017 in Forestville, California, a tragedy unfolded one night on March 14th. Gunshots rang out in the Gowan family home, prompting alarmed neighbors to immediately call the police. The victim was 35-year-old Seamus Gowan, and the perpetrator was his older brother, Sean. An argument had erupted between the siblings, during which Sean, under the influence of prohibited substances, grabbed a firearm and discharged 3 bullets into his younger brother. Police recognized the shooter's name as Sean had previously been detained as a suspect in a double homicide on a beach, but was released due to a lack of evidence. Since then, he had been in police sites twice for property damage and making threats, but had only received fines. It was also discovered that the detainee was an avid hunter and had a hobby of crafting knives and other bladed weapons. Those around him described him as antisocial, aggressive, and unpredictable. After taking his brother's life, Sean attempted to flee but was almost immediately apprehended. Law enforcement then decided to thoroughly reinvestigate this man's potential involvement in a couple's perpetration from 13 years prior. His personal social media page revealed much, where he posted pictures of his substantial weapon collection and discussed supposed telepathic and extrasensory abilities. According to his posts, he believed he was on a special mission, receiving assignments from space. This seemed like delusions of a disturbed mind, and police suspected Sean indeed had serious mental disorders. He stubbornly refused to cooperate with the investigation, spoke nonsensically, and insisted on his innocence. However, when detectives checked the personal messages on his deceased brother's page, they found something intriguing. Back in 2006, when a $50,000 reward was offered for information on the double homicide case, Sean's former girlfriend had messaged Seamus, suggesting she could claim the reward by turning in her ex-boyfriend. They both knew everything but kept silent. Unfortunately, questioning either was no longer possible since the brother had been shot, and the woman had died in a car accident 2 years earlier. An unexpected confession. Initially, Sean denied any involvement and refused to speak, but when shown the printouts of the messages between his former girlfriend and his brother, he surprisingly confessed and began to give a detailed account. His narrative not only surprised, but shocked law enforcement. Despite more than 13 years passing since the double homicide, Gowan remembered the details of that night vividly. That evening, he had left his house with a Marlin rifle. Intending to hunt in a wooded area, he aimlessly wandered for a couple of hours before descending a trail to a wild beach, which, he claimed, was a spot to encounter boars. As he walked along the shore, he spotted 2 bright sleeping bags. Approaching closer, he discovered a young man and woman sound asleep inside. He stood watching them for several minutes, then suddenly heard voices in his head commanding him to end their lives. Sean claimed this was the mission from space he could not ignore. He placed the barrel of his rifle almost against the young man's head and pulled the trigger. The sound woke the young woman, but before she could comprehend the situation, a second shot ended her life as well. He decided to collect the casings and carried them away in a beer can he had emptied while descending to the beach. Later, according to him, he tossed the can into some bushes in his father's backyard, where he went to give the rifle to his father and asked him to hide it. His elderly father asked no questions and simply buried the weapon in the dirt floor of the cellar in his old barn. Remarkably, Sean's claims were verified. The rifle was found at the site of the now collapsed barn, and the beer can with the casing still rested in the overgrown bushes in the backyard. The fact that the murderer's father had passed away in 2009 and his property had since fallen into disrepair and abandonment helped preserve these items. It turned out that the bottle found on the beach had no connection to the crime and was mistakenly considered as evidence. Forensic psychiatric evaluation Sean Gallen blamed the voices in his head, which he claimed ordered him to commit acts of violence, and asserted that he was not aware of his actions. His defense attorneys also insisted that Sean was mentally ill and unfit to stand trial. It was up to qualified psychiatrists to determine the truth of these claims. The evaluation revealed that the accused did indeed suffer from a range of mental disorders, exacerbated by the effects of alcohol and prohibited substances. However, at the time of the crime, he acted deliberately, carefully planning each step. Sean was fully aware of how to proceed and how to cover his tracks to avoid police detection. This was precisely why he first ended the life of the young man, knowing that if anything went awry, the woman would not be able to resist. For the same reason, he took the casings with him and prudently gave the rifle to his father, asking him to hide it. According to the psychiatrists, although Gallen had mental deviations, he was competent to stand trial and be held accountable for his actions. What was surprising in this complex case was that his parents, brother, and former girlfriend knew, or at least suspected, that he had committed the double homicide, yet none of them had turned him over to the police. Trial and sentence. The trial of the accused took place in the spring of 2019, nearly 15 years after the brutal act against the couple. On June 17th of that year, Sean Gallen was sentenced to 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 94 years for the end of his own brother's life in 2017. The convicted man is now serving his sentence in a special prison unit designated for particularly dangerous inmates with mental disorders. He continues to claim that he hears voices and behaves aggressively, hence he is kept under special surveillance to prevent him from harming himself or anyone else nearby. Lastly, it should be noted that the motive for the double homicide was never established. Sean simply saw the couple sleeping on the beach and decided to end their lives. The city of Welcome in the Free State Province is the youngest and most dynamically developing city in South Africa. It was founded in 1947, following the discovery of the largest gold deposit in the area the previous year. Its name translates from Afrikaans, one of the country's official languages, as greeting. Despite its welcoming name and its industry-forming gold mining, it gained widespread attention due to a grievous crime that occurred there in 2011. When the criminals were identified, the prosecution was baffled. This notorious case became the 10th in the history of international criminal activity. During the investigation, it was discovered that the case involved followers of Satanism and occultism. Michael Van Eck was born on August 14, 1987, in the young and developing city for gold miners. He became the only brother to 4 sisters, Natasha, Michelle, Bianca, and Hendriana. The boy grew up in a large and close-knit family. His parents were caring and loving people. To provide a decent life for their children, the head of the family worked hard and organized his own business. The mother created a favorable atmosphere in the home for the growth and development of the younger generation. Michael was sociable and kind, showed diligence in school and sports. He even earned a black belt in karate, which he was very proud of. This gave him confidence and resilience. After finishing school, the young man trained as an electrician. This in-demand profession opened the doors to good earnings and promising work. The young man worked in his field at mine number 4 of the Beatrix mine in the small town of Unison. He did not stop there and continued his education to become an engineer. In 2011, the 23-year-old hero of our story registered on a dating site. In this way, he wanted to distract himself from a breakup and make new acquaintances. It seemed that luck smiled at him one day. Among the numerous photos and profiles, a lonely young man took a fancy to the profile of a sweet and smiling girl. During the ensuing correspondence, the guy learned that their interests coincided. She, like him, disliked noisy parties and drunk companies and wanted to find true love and build a strong family. Michael was pleasantly surprised that he could find a suitable candidate on the internet. Since the young man still lived with his parents, He shared his joys and concerns with his mother. On April 2nd, the son boasted to her that he was going on a date, and he prepared thoroughly for it. To please the girl, he withdrew his first paycheck of 1,000 rand from his card. The only thing that troubled the young man was the unusual place his friend chose for their first meeting. It was the city cemetery. Apparently not to worry his parents, he kept quiet about it. Around 9 p.m. that same day, Michael said goodbye to his family and left the house. He headed to the designated place in the silver Peugeot 207, a gift from his parents for his coming of age. As tradition demanded, the girl was a little late, but her appearance was impressive. The stranger from the internet arrived in a pristine white dress and smiled. The conversation was relaxed, after which she suggested continuing the evening further and invited the young man to a distant part of the cemetery. There, a meadow awaited them with a spread blanket. On it lay a basket of fruits and wine. After the young people had a glass each, the beautiful companion kissed a stunned Michael. Suddenly, the pleasant feeling of the kiss turned to pain and horror. The unsuspecting young man became part of a sinister plan. Since the innocent appearance of his pen pal did not match her inner world, Chama van Heerden was born in 1991 during a crisis period for her parents. When her mother found out she was pregnant, the couple decided to delay their divorce and give their relationship another chance. However, their attempts to reconcile and improve their life together were unsuccessful. The family environment only worsened. Her mother openly disliked the little girl, seeing her as a tie to her husband. After the divorce, she took the children and moved away from her former husband. However, the failed marriage was not the main reason for her coldness. She continued to lack love and attention towards her children, even after the relationship ended. All 3 children felt lonely and misunderstood, but Chana suffered the most. She grew up withdrawn and sullen. From an early age, she exhibited psychological issues. She talked about death and drew incomprehensible pictures. Eventually, the little girl developed an imaginary friend named Azazel. Concerned about their daughter's behavior, her grandparents thought she was possessed. Thus, they decided to take her to church, where she underwent an exorcism ritual. According to a witness, her body convulsed during the prayers. In reality, Chana was scared of crowds and clearly frightened by the ordeal. The shock could have triggered an epileptic seizure. The traumatic event deeply impacted the young girl's memory, causing her to develop a fear of the dark. Additionally, her mother once told her that toys come to life at night, which led the frightened daughter to tape her doll's eyes shut and tie their bodies with shoelaces. As she grew older, her mental condition worsened. At age 10, she nearly harmed a house guest with a knife while visiting her father. Only after this incident did they seek psychiatric help for Chana. Following a specialist's evaluation, she was prescribed sedatives. The medication had a positive effect on her mood and well-being. She became calmer and more friendly. During a remission period, her father spent more time with his daughter. He often picked her up from school and took her hunting with him. By sharing his hobby, he aimed to give her the attention she lacked. The unstable teenager enjoyed her father's activity. She later confessed that she found pleasure in butchering carcasses and skinning animals. This led her to bring home dead animals, starting with rats and birds and eventually progressing to cats and dogs. She enjoyed cutting flesh and occasionally inflicted injuries on herself. During an investigation, her sister revealed that at age 12, Chana befriended an older man who introduced her to forbidden substances and took advantage of her condition. Her sisters did not inform their parents, but Chana ended the destructive relationship. This experience undoubtedly had a negative impact on her troubled psyche. At age 15, her mother moved to New Zealand, where she met another man and stayed with him. Over time, she never returned for her children. They remained with their father and stepmother, who tried their best to provide for the children, though they did not fully understand the severity of the youngest daughter's issues. Her behavior was largely attributed to adolescence. The situation worsened a year later, when Chama became involved with a 22-year-old young man interested in Satanism, occultism, and voodoo cults. The boyfriend became a real mentor to the impressionable young woman, but he was cruel in character, often suppressing and demeaning her. Nonetheless, a supportive family environment and psychotherapy yielded positive results. By her 17th birthday, Chama's life began to improve. She broke off dangerous connections, graduated from high school, and enrolled in college where she studied art and graphic design. After Chana lost interest in Satanism and stopped using forbidden substances, her emotional state improved. She excelled in her studies and secured a job in her field. At her new job, Chana found support not only from her colleagues, but also from management. It turned out she had a real talent for visual arts, which brought her respect and recognition in her professional field. At the same time, she started dating a man named Warren. To outsiders, her life appeared completely normal. Her family and close friends did not discuss her past, hoping that the difficult times were behind her. However, what was happening in her soul was hard to say. Perhaps her inner demons were merely lying dormant. Her father was the happiest for Chana. He hoped that she had finally matured and would soon marry. However, his expectations were not met. The obstacle emerged from an unexpected source. Warren had a friend named Roy who considered himself highly sensitive. Despite Chana's sweet and friendly demeanor, he sensed something repellent and malevolent in her. Yet Roy's words were not taken seriously, as her outward appearance did not match his perceptions. One day, he pulled her aside and asked, "Who is Norman?" Each time he saw her, this name popped into the clairvoyant's mind. The young man thought she might not be faithful to his friend, so he decided to ask her directly. In response, Chana unexpectedly spat in his face and demanded he stop bothering her with foolish questions. It later became known that Norman was the second name of Azazel, her imaginary childhood friend. Following the incident, the dynamics between the young people changed. At one of the parties, Chana's attention shifted to a 24-year-old named Martins. Although the young man was generally calm and sociable, there were unpleasant rumors about him. Martins van der Merwe. Martins van der Merwe was born into a well-off and respected family. Unlike Chana, he had excellent relationships with both parents. As a child, he was smart and well-mannered, performing well academically. However, it turned out that since the age of 6, he had been suffering from a mental illness. Around that time, he began experiencing hallucinations. His parents recounted that according to their son, a certain entity appeared to him, convincing the boy that he was endowed with incredible strength. Martins believed this and felt special. Gradually, his mental condition worsened and his behavior changed. Due to problems at school and home, at the age of 14, van der Merwe was hospitalized in a psychiatric facility. There, he was diagnosed with schizophrenia. Unfortunately, conventional treatment did not help. Since the family was financially secure, his parents dedicated all their efforts to finding effective medications. Thanks to the efforts of both family and doctors, the necessary drugs were eventually found. With these, nearly all deviations were controlled, except for sporadic outbursts of aggression. Martins once witnessed a stray cat being mauled by dogs. It made a deep impression on him. Instead of feeling disgust or pity, he hid the animal's body and watched it. This led him to start torturing animals. He later dropped out of school and began helping his father in the carpentry shop. In the future, Martins dreamed of continuing the family tradition. While working, his condition improved. He no longer wanted to do bad things to animals and take their lives. For this reason, he stopped taking medication. Everyone was wary of his decision, but the young man insisted that the disease had receded and that he was in control. Unfortunately, this turned out to be an inevitable mistake: general insanity. His mental state gradually deteriorated. It was around this time that Martins met Chana. These unstable young people found each other and began dating. However, outwardly they looked happy, so their parents were happy with their relationship. Of course, neither of them admitted to the problems their children had faced in the past. In the end, their union led to horrifying consequences. At first, the couple was open to the outside world, socializing and attending parties. Acquaintances recalled that they sometimes noticed cuts on the hands of young people. They joked that they were engaged in intimate experiments. After that, they began to distance themselves from people. They became interested in Satanism, voodoo cults, and occult practices. They also became interested in infamous serial criminals. In February 2011, Martins posted a picture with Chana on one of his social media pages. The pair were hugging, and the caption under the photo read, "Killers," with an ambiguous emoji. At the time, no one took their post seriously. Eventually, the young man asked his girlfriend's father for a marriage license. Mr. Van Heerden was incredibly happy. No one could have imagined what terrible dreams the couple nurtured. Instead of dreaming of traveling and children, They wanted to end their lives. Gradually, their sick fantasies turned into a bloodthirsty plan. The crazy couple decided to torture the homeless to death, and they practiced on animals. However, their plan was never realized, as the criminals could not find a suitable victim. Their monstrous plan was waiting for the right moment. The encounter. It all began when Chana posted her profile on a dating site. Before long, a young man named Michael Van Eck responded. The attractive young man caught the interest of the nefarious couple, and Chana targeted him for their plans. From the very first messages, the young people started flirting. After a few days of communication, the girl suggested they meet. Michael had been looking forward to this, but he hadn't expected it to come so soon or directly from her. Unfortunately, the somewhat unusual location for their first date didn't raise any alarms for him. Apparently, he was so eager to meet the charming conversationalist from the internet in person that he agreed to the dubious proposal. Chana and Martins meticulously prepared to bring their wild dream to life. They thought through everything thoroughly: the attire, the means to end a life, and even the setting. Chana approached the date fully prepared. The trap. The long-awaited meeting went exactly as planned for both parties. The victim fell for the bait. An angelic appearance of the girl and a kiss lulled his alertness. This gesture was the agreed-upon signal for Martins. All this time, the man had been hiding behind the tombstones. He approached Michael from behind and struck him with a knife. Unexpectedly for everyone, the young man resisted. The attackers hadn't anticipated this. Noticing that their new acquaintance was putting up a desperate fight, Chana intervened. Altogether, they inflicted about 30 knife wounds on the unfortunate young man. Ultimately, completely weakened, Michael begged them to end his suffering. Pleased with their conquest, Martin slit his throat. After that, the unthinkable began. The perpetrators dragged the body onto the blanket and proceeded with their plan. The couple severed the young man's right and left legs at the knee and decapitated him. The severed parts were placed in bags. They then decided to hide the body at the site. However, they miscalculated one thing: they had no shovels. Thus, they had to dig the earth with their hands and knives. As a result, they could not make the grave deep enough. After burying the body halfway, the perpetrators left with their trophies. Along the way, they used the victim's vehicle. Martins initially took the wheel, but later handed control over to his companion. The surge of adrenaline prevented him from keeping his eyes on the road. Upon arriving home, they stored the bags with body parts in the refrigerator as if they were groceries. After Van der Merwe had somewhat recovered, he started Michael's car and drove it to a troubled neighborhood. The criminals hoped the car would be stolen, so he left it unlocked with the keys in the ignition. The victim. The next day, a cemetery worker noticed a fresh burial that wasn't there the day before. His dreadful suspicions were confirmed when he stumbled upon bloody traces and torn clothing in the bushes. He then called over his supervisor to examine the grave. What the unintended witnesses found would long remain etched in their memory. Beneath the soil lay a dismembered male body. The authorities were immediately notified of the grim discovery. At the same time, Michael's parents were beside themselves with worry. Since the previous evening, he hadn't responded to calls. Even if it was presumed that he had stayed overnight at his internet girlfriend's place, he should have made contact by now. Instead, Michael's workplace called his parents. The concerned management wanted to understand why he was absent from a crucial site. At the same time, the police received a report about a Peugeot 207 found abandoned in a parking lot. Passers-by were alarmed by the blood stains on the trunk. After running the vehicle through their database, the owner was identified. Detectives also tracked that before its discovery, the car had been at the cemetery for a long time. The local precinct was already aware of an unidentified body found on its grounds. All signs were suspicious. Armed with this information, law enforcement officials went to the residence of Michael Van Eck. Upon arrival, the officers confirmed their suspicions. His parents had been searching for the young man since the previous day. They asked Michael's mother to come to the cemetery, where forensic specialists and search dogs were already at work, desperately trying to locate missing body parts. At the scene, the woman recognized belongings found, and she also identified her son's body by distinctive burn marks he had sustained in childhood. During the autopsy, the medical examination confirmed that the young man had suffered numerous knife wounds. Signs of his struggle were evident. It was also determined that the body had been dismembered post-mortem. At least the perpetrators had the mercy not to do this while he was still alive. Meanwhile, experts noted that the dismemberment was performed with professional precision, indicating that the perpetrators had significant experience in this area. There was no doubt that multiple attackers were involved. The number of wounds, their nature, and the strength required to subdue the victim clearly demonstrated this. Ultimately, DNA testing confirmed the identity of 23-year-old Michael Van Eck. Time to gather stones. During the investigation, police confiscated the victim's cell phone and computer. It was established that the last person the young man had communicated with was Chama Van Heerden. According to their messages, she was the one who invited him to the ominous date at the cemetery. Subsequently, detectives contacted the potential suspect and invited her to give a statement. The young woman did not refuse and arrived with her boyfriend, Martens van der Merwe. The couple was interviewed separately. During the questioning, they confessed to being involved in the group ending of a life. Upon learning of the incident, the girl's father rushed to the station. He couldn't believe what he was hearing and asked his daughter if she really was involved in the accusations against her. Chana calmly confirmed and added that she would willingly do it again. She claimed she had dreamt of this ever since she started hunting with him. The cruel confession of the seemingly sweet girl shocked not only her father but everyone present. Her boyfriend Martens also behaved defiantly. As the case gained public attention, he did not hide his pleasure from the public scrutiny and posed for the cameras. It was clear that none of the accused felt remorse for their actions. It turned out that after the crime, if caught, the mad couple planned to end their lives. But the young man changed his mind, and his partner followed suit. They wanted to live, the lair of monsters. During the search of the young couple's apartment, police felt uneasy, to say the least. The environment was horrifying. The walls were adorned with portraits of Chana, depicting her in various guises. In some, she was depicted without eyes, in others without a mouth or ears. All images of the girl were distorted. Additionally, the rooms contained ritual items, animal scalps, knives, and various objects of unclear purpose. Also found were belongings of the deceased young man, glasses, and a wallet. As Martens later confessed, they took Michael's money to buy necessary items for their next crime. However, the most horrifying discovery awaited in the refrigerator. From it, police retrieved Michael's head with the mouth sewn shut. It was assumed that the couple planned to use the young man's head as a ritual bowl later on. Eyes and ears of the victim were stored in separate containers. The victim's hand and leg were found buried near the murderer's home, alongside the bodies of various animals. The girl's diary contained horrific thoughts and their impending realization. From everything discovered during the inspection, it was clear that the couple planned not just one more crime. The process of ending lives and subsequent mutilation of bodies provided them with unimaginable pleasure. Martens and Chana underwent multiple evaluations for mental competence. Fortunately, the commission confirmed that the young individuals were aware of their actions and desired the inevitable consequences. Otherwise, they might have avoided punishment and received only mandatory treatment. Punishment. In November 2011, the trial concerning Chana took place, treating her as a serial offender. Despite this being a singular incident, she did not hide her desire to repeat her actions. She told the court that she understands she should feel shame or remorse, but for some reason, she does not. She can only grasp the gravity of her actions through societal standards and the reactions of others. Psychiatrists declared that the defendant suffers from psychopathic and antisocial disorders, apparently more dangerous than her boyfriend, but adept at concealing it. Throughout the sentencing, she remained impassive. Chana Van Heerden was found guilty and sentenced to 35 years in prison without the possibility of parole, 20 years for ending a life and an additional 15 for robbery and dismemberment. As for Martens van der Merwe, unlike his partner, he defended himself in court. He claimed not to remember the events that occurred until he found himself in jail and behaved arrogantly and aggressively. The defendant admitted to studying Satanism and occultism, trying to understand life and death. He said his relationship with Chana pushed them both towards committing the crime. During the trial, he apologized to the victim's parents, although his words sounded insincere. He implied that the victim was simply at the wrong place at the wrong time, although in reality, The mad couple had lured the unfortunate man into a premeditated trap. Michael's mother could not contain her distress and struck the accused during one of the sessions. Ultimately, Martens van der Merwe was also found guilty of the charges against him and sentenced to 35 years in prison, but with a chance for parole after serving half of his sentence. Life after. Until 2014, the lovers kept in touch behind bars. In his letters, Martens called Chana a dark goddess, writing, "Lady Blackmore, when you part your lips, words of a dead butterfly spell out. They fall upon my mystical heart and paint it with sweet poison, spreading beautiful darkness through my empty veins." Over time, Chana ended the relationship with her former lover, feeling that they had grown cold and distant from each other. It is known that in prison the woman behaves exemplarily, teaching her fellow inmates art and theology. Collectors fascinated by the lives of humanity's worst, maniacs, offenders, cannibals, have paid large sums for a photograph of the woman with her autograph, as well as a print of her hand. Remarkably, Martens also developed his own fan club. For a long time, police monitored his followers to prevent them from emulating his actions. The convicted man continued treatment and completed his education through correspondence courses. Thus, a good-natured young man became the victim of a terrible scheme by two mentally unstable individuals. Driven by their own desires, lacking restraining mechanisms and societal norms, the perpetrators decided they had the right to take another person's life. Yet what is also monstrous in this story is how many troubled individuals there are among us. Sometimes behind an innocent facade lies sheer hell. New acquaintances do not always positively affect our lives. Sometimes they can mark a point of no return. Taking the life of one's children is not just a heinous criminal offense. Such a desperate step can be pushed by a woman's altered consciousness under strong substances or by a painful psycho-emotional state when the body cannot cope with stress. The high-profile case of Veronica Youngblood has become a vivid and horrible example of how disturbed psyche, unhealthy relationships, and constant stress can lead to irreversible consequences. Veronica committed a terrible crime, but at the trial, the young woman claimed that, despite what she had done, she had always been a good mother and wished her children only good. This story evokes both anger and pity, but to understand what exactly pushed Veronica to such a terrible and inhumane act, you need to look back a few decades and see what she had to go through. Perhaps her own childhood traumas played no small part in this, but this does not absolve her of responsibility. Veronica Youngblood's abusive childhood. Veronica Youngblood, maiden name Castro, was born in 1986 in the suburbs of Santa Rosa in central Argentina. She was the eldest of two daughters in the family and was raised with her sister Mara, who was born in 1988. The girl's childhood was poor and full of hardship, but not even hunger and lack of basic necessities was the worst. Her parents did not work anywhere, abused alcohol, and took their anger out on their eldest daughter, beating her almost daily, sometimes to such an extent that she could not walk. Grandfather also did not harbor any warm feelings for his own granddaughters, considering them extra hungry mouths that need to be fed. From an early age, Veronica got used to the fact that she had nowhere to wait for protection and support. She felt superfluous in her own family, and the only truly close person to her was only her younger sister. When the girl was 14 years old, her parents divorced and separated. Her father was not interested in the fate of his daughters, but her mother, who was actively trying to organize her personal life, did not need children. Veronica was forced to become an escort to support herself and her younger sister without any education because she saw no other way out. At the age of 15, she became pregnant, and at the age of 16, she gave birth to her first child, a daughter Sharon. She never gave her eldest daughter's father's name, and probably didn't know it herself, having gotten pregnant by one of her many clients, a follower of a strange cult. As a teenager, without support and help, the girl joined a rather strange South American religious cult called Umbanda. It was a combination of heterogeneous beliefs and cult positions, among which were the foundations of Catholicism, spiritualism, and African cults. In Umbanda, it is customary to honor spirit guides who are able to communicate with the souls of dead people. The followers of the cult also believe in reincarnation and spiritual development through various practices. Veronica, being an impressionable and driven girl, was quickly imbued with the peculiarities of this belief, and according to the memories of her younger sister, she herself began to believe that she could make contact with spirits and communicate with the dead. Veronica did talk about hearing voices and seeing dreams, and also believed that after death, the soul of each person is reborn for a better life. Most likely, such a specific religious cult was fertile ground for the development of mental illness, given Veronica's difficult childhood and her own parents' abuse of her. The other followers of the cult treated her with kindness and love, which is what she lacked the most, so she believed literally every word they told her, moving to the United States, meeting Ronald Youngblood. When exactly Veronica decided to move to the United States of America, it is not known, but it happened in the late 2000s, when she was a little more than 20 years old. Taking her young daughter, she settled in Hampton Roads, in the state of Virginia. There, the attractive young woman took a job with an escort service company. In late 2008, Veronica met a guy whose name was Ronald Youngblood. He was a few years older than her and served as a pilot in the U.S. Navy. He and Veronica first met when Ronald used the services of the company she worked for. Apparently, Ronald was immediately attracted to this young person because he himself expressed a desire to continue to communicate. Soon, he insisted that Veronica left the escort, after which they began to live together. And in 2009, in one of the chapels in Las Vegas, the couple officially legalized their relationship, arranging a modest ceremony without guests. After the wedding, Veronica's life became stable for the first time, and she was not afraid to look into the future and confidently made plans. She had her own home, a caring husband with a stable job, who fully provided for her, while Veronica could be engaged in creating home comfort. But most importantly, Ronald took her daughter Sharon as his own, surrounding her with care and love. In 2013, the couple had their common child, daughter Brooklyn. The couple was over the seventh heaven from happiness, and the eldest heiress was happy that she had a baby sister, Sharon Youngblood. After the wedding, Ronald gave Veronica and her oldest daughter his last name, although officially the child he did not adopt. Nevertheless, the girl called him Daddy and reached out to him. Ronald himself tried not to deny her anything, paid attention, and engaged in the upbringing of the child. Sharon grew up quite bright, sociable, and purposeful girl. She studied well in school, had a lot of friends, was active and friendly. From an early age, she was involved in sports, was a member of the school cheerleading team, played tennis. But the girl achieved the greatest success in figure skating. Coach, who worked with Sharon, noted how easy and at ease she felt on the ice, as if in his native element. In childhood and adolescence, she regularly participated in various figure skating competitions, where she repeatedly won prizes. She was prophesied a brilliant sports career, noting the tenacity and diligence of the young figure skater. But alas, it was not destined to come true. Unstable family life. After several years of living together, the relationship between Ronald and Veronica began to deteriorate. Both spouses had difficult characters. They were excessively emotional and unyielding. If at first they managed to find compromises, then now neither of them did not want to make concessions. Moreover, the spouses began to do many things to each other for evil, because of which between them often began to erupt scandals with violent clarification of relations, mutual accusations, and insults. In addition, Ronald was very jealous and overbearing. If before the wedding he promised to forget about what his chosen one used to do, now he reminded her of it, every chance he got. He said that he pulled her out of the mud, provided for her, took her child, and now he demands to live by his rules. Family quarrels began to escalate into physical assaults, with the husband and wife taking turns to be the instigators of the fights. The police received complaints of domestic violence from both sides, but in most cases, these reports were soon withdrawn, and the spouses continued to live together. To be fair, the children were not involved in their parents' squabbles and were never physically hurt, although their emotional state can only be guessed at. In 2014, Ronald was sent to Central America, to the Republic of Honduras for duty, and his family followed him. During this period, relations between the spouses became very acute. Veronica complained to the local police that her husband was raising his hand against her, restricting her finances by blocking her card, and forbidding her to use the internet and car. Ronald later said in his defense that he did so because he found out that his spouse was cheating on him. The husband thought that by depriving his wife of money, personal transportation, and the ability to communicate with her lover, he would keep her at home. As a result, Veronica filed a complaint with the U.S. Embassy and had her husband extradited from Honduras and returned to the United States. However, this incident did not affect his career, and he was soon transferred to Washington, D.C. to the main department of the country's Navy. However, relations between the couple finally soured. Breakup and ongoing conflicts. In 2016, the spouses moved to Florida, the place of Ronald's new appointment. By that time, they had already virtually separated, but continued to live together under one roof, and Ron still fully supported Veronica and daughters. By the beginning of 2017, the family moved again, this time to the small town of Oakton, which is in the state of Virginia, where the spouses began the official divorce process. But even during the dissolution of marriage, Ron and Veronica did not separate. They lived in the same house, although apparently they simply could not stand each other anymore. Both later claimed that no matter what, they wanted to raise children together, but in fact, Veronica had no source of income and could not even rent a room for herself. The issue of future custody of the children became especially acute, and Veronica realized that she would not be able to raise the children on her own because they were all completely dependent on Ronald. He also realized this and did not miss the opportunity to remind his wife of this, sometimes descending to outright blackmail, which brought the young woman to hysterics. At some point, driven to despair, Veronica decided to take a loan from the bank to have at least some of their own funds. However, as a guarantor, she specified her still legal husband without informing him. When Ronald received a call from the bank, another scandal broke out. Naturally, he refused to act as guarantor, and the actions of his wife became for him another reason to humiliate her. True, a couple of months later, the couple was finally able to agree, and the scandals between them for a while subsided. According to the court decision, they could continue to live together, and together bring up their children, while neither of them will be charged alimony. But that truce didn't last long. In the fall of 2017, Ronald filed a lawsuit against Veronica, accusing her of aggressive and inadequate behavior. He stated that the spouse smashed his smartphone, launching it into the wall, drowned in a basin of water with a working laptop, and also smashed the windshield of his car with a stone. After that, Veronica was obliged to move out and forbade her to go near Ron. At the same time, the youngest daughter, Brooklyn, was temporarily given full custody of her father until the next court hearing. 3 weeks later, the divorce proceedings were finalized, but having received a certificate of divorce, the former spouses began to live together again and, it seemed, even reconciled. Courts and custody battle. About 6 months later, the former spouses appeared in court together again, but this time they provided a multi-page agreement detailing their plan for custody of their shared daughter. All the matter is that Ronald was transferred to the state of Missouri and the former wife and children moved with him, but before Veronica wanted to officially settle a number of nuances regarding the custody of their daughter, Brooklyn. The agreement stated that Ronald would provide his ex-wife with housing that would be close to his home so they could raise their daughter together. The court approved the document in April 2018, and the move itself was scheduled for August of that year. But a month later, Veronica unexpectedly changed her decision and went to court again. The young woman turned for help to a lawyer, who had to confidently draw up and make a number of changes to the previously approved agreement. Veronica said she was doing this because of changed circumstances. By then, she had finished her nursing school training and had been offered a job in Oakton with a good salary. That way, she could more or less support herself and the girls, and there was no need to move after her ex-husband. In addition, the new job promised to help her find and pay for her own place to live. Due to her new circumstances, Veronica now sought full custody of her daughter Brooklyn, which she specified in an amendment to the agreement. The new hearing was held in July 2018, a month before the previously scheduled departure to Missouri. But the court refused to make any changes to the previously approved agreement, and the former spouses were to move to another state to share custody of their shared daughter, as previously agreed. Veronica seemed to agree with the court's decision, as she made no further attempt to challenge it. 2 weeks after the last court hearing, Ronald filed a legal notice with his new address where he would live after the move, which was less than a month away. Only a few minor details needed to be finalized, and he was on his way. Everything seemed to be going according to plan, but Sharon and Brooklyn had only days to live. Disturbing call. Toward evening, on August 5, 2018, emergency services received a disturbing call from 15-year-old Sharon. The girl was crying and gasping in pain. She begged to be saved and talked about how much she wanted to live. She said she was badly injured, and when the cameraman asked what had happened, she said she had just been shot with a gun by her own mother. According to Sharon, she and her younger sister were asleep when their mom walked into the room and shot Brooklyn. At the sound of the gunshot, the older sister woke up and was literally numb with fear. She asked her mom, "What are you doing?" Veronica replied that she was taking her daughters to God. Sharon tried to run away, but Veronica shot her in the back. With her last strength, she made it to the next room, where she locked herself in and called emergency services. The operator assured Sharon that help was on its way and asked her to hold on for a few more minutes, but then he heard the girl screaming in despair, followed by another gunshot. Then there was a frightening silence and the call was cut off. The police and paramedics arrived on the scene by 10 o'clock in the evening, and a horrifying picture was revealed before them. By this time, Ronald, who was on business in another city, had also called the emergency services, asking them to send someone to his house immediately because his ex-wife, according to him, might have done something terrible. Veronica had already called him and told him everything, but Ron refused to believe in the truth of her words. Sharon was the first to be found lying on the floor with 2 gunshot wounds, one to the chest and one to the back. Amazingly, despite the massive blood loss, she still had a faint pulse and was desperately clinging to life. Sharon was quickly taken to the intensive care unit of the nearest hospital, but despite the efforts of doctors, the next day, she died. Brooklyn's breathless body was discovered in her bedroom, in her own bed. She had been killed by a single gunshot to the head. The girl's father arrived about an hour later, rushing home as fast as he could. But Veronica's whereabouts remained unknown until the emergency services received another call from one Manuel Bellows, who reported Veronica's whereabouts. Who is Manuel? Manuel was one of the lawyers the young woman consulted with in the spring of 2018 regarding custody of her youngest daughter. Veronica, as the lawyer later argued in court, immediately struck him as a rather serious, collected, and responsible young woman fighting for custody of her beloved daughters. In addition, she was very attractive in appearance, divorced, and not in a relationship at the time. The two soon hit it off, quickly developing into a tumultuous love affair. Only a few months later, Manuel noticed some oddities in her behavior, which alerted him in particular it was the religious views of Veronica and her frightening statements about the upcoming meeting with God. At the end of July, Veronica called Manuel and invited him to her home, saying that they needed to have a serious talk. When he arrived, the young woman was home alone. Her ex-husband and children were staying with Ronald's relatives. The lights were off in the house, but candles were burning everywhere, creating a romantic atmosphere, and there was a dinner for 2 on the table. She confided in him that she had lost the nursing position she had been looking forward to and had refused to move to another state because of it. Veronica also shocked her boyfriend with the news that she was pregnant by him. This information was later unconfirmed. Manuel did not know how to react to this, and Veronica tried to seduce him and inclined him to intimacy. According to Manuel, nothing happened between them that night because he felt a strange discomfort and threat coming from Veronica, as if his life was in danger. He asked her for time to think about how to proceed, and then hurriedly left her house. On the evening of August 5th, Manuel heard someone ring the doorbell at his house. He opened the door and saw Veronica on the doorstep. She was frighteningly calm, and there was no emotion on her face at all. Veronica asked to be let into the house, but before Manuel could do so, he saw a gun in her hands, and he was scared shitless. He said he would call the police if she did not leave immediately, but Veronica, with the same stony face, replied that he could do so since she no longer cared. She then added that she had killed her daughters, so the police were already looking for her anyway. After these words, Manuel got really scared. He closed the door and hurried to the phone. While Veronica went back to the rental car, she came in and just waited to be arrested. The arrest and the full picture of the crime. When the police arrived at Manuel's house, Veronica was sitting in the car in the driver's seat, and next to her, in the passenger seat, lay the loaded gun she had used hours earlier to shoot her daughters. The young woman did not resist. There was still no emotion on her face. In addition to the gun, 2 more full magazines were found in the car. Already at the station, Veronica confessed that she had bought the gun 10 days ago at an exhibition in order to kill her daughters and then take her own life. According to her, she decided to take this desperate step to take revenge on her ex-husband and prevent him from taking their common daughter, Brooklyn. She also added that her personal life didn't work out and she became depressed. Apparently, the eldest daughter noticed the strange behavior of her mother and suspected something wrong because a few days before the tragedy, she directly asked her if she was going to kill them. But what the mother answered her remains a mystery. In the afternoon, on August 5th, Veronica gave her daughters sweets, in which she had previously mixed sleeping pills so that the girls would not resist. When they went to their room and fell asleep, the mother took out a prepared gun, loaded it, and went to her daughters. First, she went to Brooklyn's crib, put the gun to her head, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot woke up Sharon, who didn't immediately realize what was happening, and asked her mother about it. Veronica replied that she would take her and her sister to God, then pointed the gun at her eldest daughter. But Sharon jumped out of bed, rushing to the door, and was immediately shot in the back. She managed to run to the next room and call for help while her mother tried to open the door. When Veronica did enter the room, Sharon screamed and took a second bullet to the chest. Veronica then called her ex-husband and told him what she had done and was now going to take her own life as well. She blamed Ronald for everything, saying that she hated him and that he had ruined her life. However, the young woman then changed her mind about leaving her life for some reason and went to her boyfriend's house, where she was arrested. Youngblood fully admitted her guilt, and when she was asked what punishment she would give herself, the woman said that it should be the death penalty. It is noteworthy that in the state of Virginia, such a measure has not been practiced for a long time, and Veronica knew about it. Trial and sentencing. Initially, the defendant refused the services of a lawyer and fully admitted her guilt, but then she abruptly changed her testimony and decided to use the help of a public defender. She later claimed that she heard voices ordering her to do this to her daughters, and she complied. Veronica also said that she had a harsh childhood, from which she remembered only beatings and hunger, and that her ex-husband had finally killed her belief that there was anything good waiting for her in life. She added that she did not want the same fate to befall her daughters. The trial took a long time because Veronica refused to leave her cell to attend the sessions. In addition, she attempted to commit suicide several times, but did so in such a way that she was saved each time and did not cause any serious harm to herself. The defense lawyer tried to convince the court that his client suffers from a mental disorder developed against the background of childhood traumas, the influence of a religious cult, and the abuse of her ex-husband. The defense lawyer also argued that Veronica was in an insane state at the time of the crime and did not realize her actions. But despite all the efforts of the lawyer, the court saw in the actions of the woman cold calculation, because she had purchased weapons in advance, fed the children sweets with sleeping pills, and then proceeded to implement her terrible plan. Her actions were not spontaneous. They could not be written off as a state of affect or a sharp aggravation of mental disorder. The final verdict in the case was handed down in March 2023. Veronica was found guilty and sentenced to 78 years in prison. In fact, this term will be a life sentence for her. It is worth noting that many people found Ronald's behavior in court strange. He did not look like a grief-stricken father, and when his former wife, sobbing, testified, he smirked. After the verdict, he only remarked that he was quite happy with the outcome.